Alright guys, let's go ahead and get started. Running late, not super unusual. Still trying to get a few things set up, but otherwise we're good to go, I think. Hopefully your guys' day is going well. I'm sitting a little bit higher. It's nice. I should probably be sitting this height all the time if it's like head to monitor that whole ergonomics thing. So we'll see how it goes. My feet are a little off the ground though, which is fun, but it does make me feel like a small child and like I can't touch the ground, except with my toes, but not in a bad way. But we'll go ahead and get started. How are you? Are you doing well? Hopefully you're doing well as well. Well, you get it. You don't need to linger on it. Hopefully things are going well for you. We got a few things to talk about today. Today we're primarily going to talk about the triangle of power. We're going to talk about authority and how it works in, how it did work in sort of a feudalistic kind of style, and how you can fold that into your own D&D games to kind of add a little bit more realism or verisimilitude. Like, that's important, but also it's just a way to kind of muddy the waters a bit. And anytime that you muddy the waters with your D&D campaigns as a dungeon master or game master of any game, you create a lot. You create opportunities for friction, and friction creates that drama, that thing that we want, that conflict. Things to not work quite as smoothly as they should be. I'll go ahead and take off my glasses. So that way, you guys don't see the reflection in my eyes, because I know we're all spellbound by my eyes. But we'll go ahead and move on. So that's primarily what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the triangle of power, and that, by the way, is sort of royal power, noble power, and church power. In that truly European medieval Renaissance style, and how that works. So that's what we're going to kind of focus on in this. So if you want to, this be helpful, I think, because I don't see a lot of D&D worlds where religion's really delved into particularly, and that's not particularly like anything like Gnosticism or anything like that. Not necessarily the what is the religion and how it functions, but more like the structure of it as an entity. Often you have somebody who plays a cleric and they're just like, oh yeah, you're a cleric in the world, and when you go to a town there's like a temple, and very in the same way that Skyrim is kind of like that, where it's like, oh, you go to a place and there's like a temple, and that's pretty much all the information you ever get about it. You're like, no, you can actually, especially when we look at things that are like medieval-ish or feudalism, like the church at that time period is so important to what's going on, and such a power player in the politics and really everything that's going on in the world. So I like being able to be like, oh, this is something that's actually very, very, very important in the world, and has a power structure that's actually, in a lot of instances, more powerful than whatever kingdom you're in. They tend to have more resources, more power, more manpower than whatever kingdom you might be in, especially in a truly medieval feudalistic kind of era, where the kings typically actually don't hold that much power. They're kind of like first among peers as far as like nobles are truly concerned. And so looking at that aspect and be like, oh, so what is the power of the church, which is something that crosses kingdom or state boundaries. And we're looking at the nobles that are in place, because they're very important, because like I said, the king doesn't hold typically that much power in a true feudalistic kind of society in history. They're sort of like a first among peers, or they're sort of like a head of a board, if we wanted to put in sort of like corporate speak terms. They're kind of like the head of a board, rather than necessarily even a CEO. They don't wield that. Traditionally, they they typically don't wield that much power. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the actual, this entire section that's also left out in most games, which is sort of the royal, or the kingdoms, or queendoms, whoever's in charge. The sovereigns, power structure that goes from the very tippy top, which is them, all the way down to the lowest holdings. Because we'll talk about this, we'll talk about a little bit about like Charlemagne and aspects of history and things to look out for, and how we can sort of fold that into our world building, especially when we're looking at things like hex crawling and how to fold that in. And we'll look at some of that stuff. But let's go ahead and get started. That's sort of the introduction. We'll go ahead and move on to meat and potatoes of everything. So with that in mind, I think the easiest thing to do is kind of show you exactly a refresher on sort of how I do hex crawling, or a hex map, or world map, if you will. So I do have a world map. I'm going to bring this up. I don't think I have. We'll show the first thing and then I'll show the other thing. How about that? Let's go ahead and let me throw you guys over to the workspace. There we go. So the first thing I want to do is I actually want to change this. I'm going to change this window cap quick. There we go. So this is the current sort of world map that I run most of my games in. And this is the river map, so it shows you where sort of like the major rivers are in the world. As you can see, there are places where there are a lot of rivers, there are places where there are not very many rivers. And these are not all rivers, these are just sort of the major rivers in the world. So we're talking like the Volgas, the Niles, the Mississippis, the Yangtze, the Yellow, those sorts of things. The Amazon, etc. These are sort of the major rivers that are in the world. They're not all the rivers, they're just the like high profile ones that most people know. We can see that here. The idea is that what I want particularly to show you guys is that this is the world map. As you'll notice, it's a hex map. So it's not one-for-one artistic rendering of what the world looks like, but it is the basic, the highest level of play that you can do within this world. And you would be moving around on this hex map if you were doing, let's say, that 17th level and plus. That's that tier 4 kind of play where you're like, oh, we're literally teleporting across the world, doing that kind of stuff. This would be the map you would be working off. There's also, of course, points of interest on it. There are clear top level atlas points of interest, which are big capital cities, major fortifications, big religious sites. It's like cathedrals, Hagia Sophia kind of things. What else is up there? Any sort of major monster layers. So any sort of monster dungeons, that would be like your Halaster's Undermountain, things like that. They're like super well-known dungeons that are, or strongholds that are known by people around the world. These are the sort of things where when you think about, when you to bring it into sort of a real world context, this would be like, the wonders of the world kind of aspect. Like, oh yeah, well of course I know the pyramids of Giza, and the Taj Mahal, and the Statue of Liberty, and those sorts of things. The Colossus Roads, etc. So those are what kind of fall within this Atlas framework. What else? I missed something else. Oh, major ruins too. Major ruins as well. Which kind of also fits in with that Pyramids of Giza kind of aspect, where it's like, this is a thing that you go and rob because you know that it's got a whole bunch of filthy lucre within it. Lots of treasure within it you want to get out. That's sort of the top level Atlas level hexes. This is the world map. It is 60 by 30. And I do that because each of the Atlas hexes are 6 degrees of longitude and latitude across, so side to side. That means that, if you do 60 of those are 360. That's the whole globe. It gives you the whole world. And this is a very Earth-like setting. So it is roughly the size of Earth, and it is massive and daunting. And again, I always put this sort of disclaimer at the front of these sort of videos, but we're going to do this anyways. Don't do this. This is not a good idea. You don't need to do this to run D&D or Pathfinder or whatever you're running. This is beyond the pale of what you need to do. This is sick. It's twisted. You don't need to do this. This is a thing that I do. It's not a thing that you need to do. But I'm hoping that when I do these things and I show these things off, that you can pick the little nuggets, the little pieces out of it, and pull it into your own games to sort of bolster it, make it more robust, and make it a little bit more fleshed out. But you certainly do not need this. This is a world map. You do not need this at all by any means. Don't do this. This is a bad idea. I've been working on this for years. So if you're like, oh, well, I couldn't figure this out in 15 minutes, you're not supposed to. And you shouldn't be doing it at all. Anyways, now that full disclaimer is over, those sickos that are in here that are going to do it are going to do it. So we're going to move on. So this is basically the full world map. It's 60 by 30. That way you get the full, polar north to polar south, as well as 360 around circumference of the globe. And because it is a flat projection, or this is how much stupid work I put into this. Geography terms, like projections are styles of maps that you're trying to. There's a thing is that you can't really make a spherical object make sense laying flat. Those shapes you can't really make a 3-dimensional sphere into a 2-dimensional shape really well. It doesn't really work like that. So this would be like what we call a Mercator projection, which is the standard rectangle map that you look at where Greenland is the size of Africa, and you're like, that doesn't make sense. This is a Mercator projection. So when you're looking at it, notice that it is already very skewed off of what you're looking at directly. Where you see that there's all this Arctic area down here at the bottom. And be like, remember that this would be like truly kind of condensed. It would be more oval-like. The things at the very top and very bottom would be a little bit more squished than the things in the middle. That's weird map stuff. You're probably not interested in that. I'm just, for those few of you who are, that is what we're dealing with. And notice that I've taken a lot of this stuff into consideration when I'm working on this. Trust me, I've thought about these maps way too much. More than I really probably should. So that's the world map. So each one of these is what I call an atlas hex. So when I do hex mapping, there's 4 levels of hexes. Atlas hex is the largest hex, as you can see here. They're about 6 degrees of latitude or longitude side to side. Hexes are really nice because if you do 6 to a side from side to side, that's 7 point to point, which means that this map is just a little bit out of scale because it's a little bit taller than it should be, but that's okay. We're not going to get into that too much. I really did it for simplicity's sake and the fact that doing a rectangular map is already out of proportion anyways. So it's not that big of a deal. But we will go ahead, and it still works like diagonally, so I'm getting into the weeds. We're not gonna mess with that. The fact is, it's fine. It's fine. It works. So if you're looking to make a hex map, I propose 60 by 30 because I find that works really well and gives you very particular sizes, which leads us into our next point where we're going to talk a little bit about, just so you guys understand, the levels of the hex mapping. So this is the highest level of hex mapping. This is Atlas hexes. They're 60 by 30, which means there's what? How many hexes is that? 60 by 30 is 1800, right? Let me actually pull this up. Helps if I turn my keyboard on. Then that's 60 by 30. That's 800, right? Yeah. 1,800 hexes. So it's a lot of hexes. You're already starting to see the scale of the world that I'm building is massive. That's a ton. Now, most of those are deep ocean hexes where there's literally nothing going on. But that still means that even at roughly... Because again, I made it very Earth-like. So even roughly at 30% is what? 540 hexes. That's a lot of hexes for a top level. And then there's more hexes underneath that. They work like Matryoshka dolls, like the little Russian nesting dolls. So let's go ahead. I'm going to throw you guys over to the other thing that we're looking at. Not that. I'm going to throw you guys over here. Which is a little thing that I kind of put up for you guys. A little primer. Here we go. Of how the hex mapping kind of works. Okay, perfect. Get out of my way. So this is the Atlas hex that we were talking about at the very top. It's an Atlas hexes are 6 degrees of longitude or latitude. That's one of the reasons that I use longitude and latitude is because it allows me to use nautical miles, which is slightly longer than a normal imperial mile, a customary measurement mile. One of the things I like it is because they fit very neatly within longitude and latitude, and it's 12 based rather than 10 based, which is how we normally do math. But 12 base is 12 is a highly divisible number, which is very useful. It's the same way we do time. Usually when you divide things by time, you don't usually run into too many issues, but if you have a base 10 and you're doing division, you run into a lot of issues because actually 10 is not divisible by a lot of numbers. But 12 is a highly divisible number. You can divide it by 1, 2, 3, 4, 6. And then if you start going up, you're able to do 8, 9, 10 very easily. So really the only thing it's not divisible by is about 5, which strangely enough, when you do base 10 counting, 5 is about the only thing it's divisible by. So it's really a trade-off. And so you'll see that before sort of things like the metric system took over that base 10 system, that if you look at a lot of old imperial or money things, a lot of them are based off of 12, which makes sense because it's very highly divisible numbers. If you ever tried to split a bill between 3 people, it's a pain in the butt. But not if you have a base 12 counting system, then it's very easy. Which is how a lot of money used to be, but it's not anymore. I'll get off that soapbox. I like it. I base that stuff off of that because it makes it very easy to do math in my head without having to, pull out a calculator and deal with a bunch of decimal points or weird percentages. So an Atlas hex is 6 degrees of longitude and latitude. That is 316 nautical miles. There are 60 nautical miles basically in a degree of longitude or latitude. So if you ever look at GPS, like any sort of positioning system, they'll be like, oh, there's this degrees of longitude, latitude, this many minutes, and this many seconds. And that's because it all uses that sort of base 60 time frame, the same way that we use literal time, which means that it's highly divisible. Means when you have 60 as your base component, it's divisible by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's not divisible by 7. Not divisible by 8 usually. Only in specific circumstances. Divisible by 9. And divisible by 10. So it kind of gives you this huge array of being able to do very easy math with it. The 360 nautical miles are about 414.28 miles, or 666.72 kilometers. So they're big. They're big hexes. The idea is that these hexes are, and that's just side to side. That's not the full area. That's just side to side. Is how far they are. So there are a lot of hexes that are larger than contemporary nations today. Keep that in mind. Which makes it pretty easy to figure out which nations or empires or whatever in the world are really large. If they're larger than a hex, then they're pretty large. And so within every atlas hex, there are 31 comprising region hexes. And that's the second level down here that you see. Now you might be wondering, what are these little gray hexes around the edges? These are hexes because it doesn't make a perfect hexagon. So you would see that these are particularly where parts of the hex that we're talking about would extend into. So each of these gray hexes includes one or more hexes within it, because it's where sort of like the vertex is, or it's where part of the side of that shape should be. So it's divided between 2 or 3 different hexes. And usually when I'm making that, as far as biomes are concerned, I just kind of roll what are the biomes around it, whichever one I land on. Usually it's like a, you know, these do a d6 around them, 6 hexes around them. So I just roll a d6 and be like, okay, which one of these is this hex going to be? And it just siphons off of one of those parent hexes. So it always makes sense in the world. And as far as points of interest, I don't ever put anything in those points of interest because they can't be tied to a specific hex. So I'm just like, there are just a bunch of hexes in the world that are guaranteed to be empty, which works out fine. It's really not noticeable once you get down into the level and really look at a larger map with a whole bunch of stuff in it. You're really not going to notice it at all. You won't even be able to see the shapes. But that's how it works. So a region hex is 1 longitude or latitude. So that big atlas hex is 6 wide, essentially. That hex is 6 wide. As you'll see here, it's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. There, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it shows you how wide it is. So each one of those are 1 degree of longitude or latitude, if we were using this hex. And right, we have the same structure. So it's 31 region hexes within that big atlas hex. Then there are 31 county hexes within that. So each region hex is about 1 degree of longitude and latitude, or about 60 nautical miles, 69 statute miles, or 111.12 kilometers. Each region hex comprises 31 county hexes. So we have atlas at the very top, region, county, and at the very bottom are league hexes, which we'll get into in just a second. Because things will change a little bit once we get down there. So this is the county hex. So within each one of these guys that's here, there is one of these. This full size thing fits within one of those. So we had 1 degree of longitude and latitude, or about 60 nautical miles. When we get down to the county hex side, each of these hexes are about 10 minutes of longitude and latitude, or about 10 nautical miles, which is about 11.51 statute miles, or 18.52 kilometers. So that's our third level. So we have the atlas level, then we've got 31 region hexes within that atlas. Within each one of those region hexes, there are 31 county hexes. This allows you to really drill down very quickly from the very, very top level. You're looking at a world map all the way down to, hey, what's within like a mile of here? These 4 levels allow you to do that very, very quickly, very easily, because they all fit very nicely within that. So in that county hex, each county hex comprises 19 league hexes, not 31. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. One of the changes I made for the reasoning for that is that it just makes the math make a little bit more sense. It's a little bit easier to do in my head. Which is one of the things that I look for primarily when I'm doing any sort of hex mapping, is like, I want to make things easy on myself. So doing this making a hex map that makes sense very quickly, that I can do the math in my head very quickly, really helps. I'm not having to do a bunch of weird percentages and decimal points. Like you can see here, there's 11.51 miles or 18.52 kilometers. Like suddenly you're getting into very complicated math. But if I stick with that longitude and latitude style, it's like, okay, it's 6 degrees of longitude and latitude, 1 degree of longitude and latitude, 10 nautical miles, 2 nautical miles. It's very easy to drill down very quickly, and we'll show you another consideration why I made this when we get there to the league hexes. But yeah, that's how the county hex works. So these are named. A region is kind of a region. A county is kind of roughly close to a county. In the US, at least, a county is on average about 120 square miles, and a county hex is about 111 square miles. So they're roughly similar, not quite similar, but pretty close. I mean, they're within what, like a 1% or 10%, so that's not bad. As far as scale, in the county, when we get down the county, that is telling you a little bit about the administration level, which is what we're going to talk about today. The administration is sort of like accounts level. So it gives you an idea of sort of who's in charge at each one of these. So once you get down to the county hex, you're like, oh, well, there's probably a count or an earl that's sort of in charge of this area. That's county hexes, and then we'll get down to league hexes. So, cutting me off at the bottom. Here, let me add some hexes to the bottom. We can scroll down a little bit further. There we go. That way you guys can see it. So as you can see, the shape differs once you get down here with those 19 hexes instead of 31. And the primary reason I did this, because if I did that, I would have 6 hexes across, and dividing 10 into 6 is, well, that's a bunch of decimal points. So instead I decided to divide it into, we did that base 10, divide it into 5, which means it's 5 across, which gives me that nice 2 nautical miles for each hex, which makes things much, much easier. So this is a league hex or a local hex. I call them both. They're about 2 minutes of longitude and latitude across, which is 2 nautical miles, 2.3 miles, or 3.7 kilometers. And the primary reason, one of the primary reasons I did this, is that this roughly equates to about an hour's walking it, because we don't know that without regards of terrain. It's a little bit slower. Normal sort of ideal walking speed is about 3.1 miles per hour instead of 2.3. But that 3.1 is used in things like urban planning and things like that, where you assume that you have a sidewalk that's perfectly graded, and you walk in a straight line. Whereas this 2.3 is a little bit more closer to what we kind of consider backpacking speed, which I know, both personal history and research, personal history backpacking and out in the wilderness and walking along trails and having 50 plus pounds on your back that you're carrying with you, or you're carrying all your gear with you with a group, and be like, this is more closer to what you could expect would be a reasonable rate of travel. So 2.3 miles is quite good for, it's not great. We'll say it's perfectly average walking speed for anything that's like backpacking or adventurers who have all their crap on their back and they're walking. They may or may not be walking on a road or trail. They might be bushwhacking. They might be cutting their way through a forest or something like, or jungle or something like that. We don't know. And this changes the way that I do hex crawling. A lot of traditional hex crawl systems have you assumes that the adventurers will be going at a consistent pace throughout the day, and you just track. They're like, oh, well, they can get through 10 hexes or whatever it is throughout a day. Basically, they know their rate of travel, and then they just assume whatever. Then they change the rate of travel based on the terrain that's in there. It's a lot of bookkeeping is what I'm trying to get at too. It's a lot of Dungeon Master or Game Master bookkeeping. And so I made life a little bit easier on myself, and I advise you to do that as well. It's just to be like, look, you go through a hex, it takes an hour. Sometimes that hour is easy, sometimes it's difficult, and gives me a little like fluctuation, allows me to be a little loosey-goosey with the firm distance of that, because the firm distance actually isn't very important in D&D or hex crawling at all. It doesn't really matter actually how far it is. It really matters how difficult it is to get to. And so I focus in, instead of being like, okay, there are so many hours in the day. Every time that you guys go through a hex, when I do the hex crawling, You roll a d4, and that tells you how much effort you have to expend. Once you hit your Constitution score, so let's say that I was playing a warlock in our game yesterday, who has a Constitution of 14. So once I hit 14, so 1d4, 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 you know, on average, that's going to be what? 2d4 would be 5, so 10. So I'm going to make it through about 5 or 6 hexes, which makes sense. That's about 10 to 12 nautical miles and more statute miles, which is a pretty good pace. It's not a great pace. It's not 20 miles is kind of the standard for like a true march. But not being a marching has a lot of problems with it, using that as a basis for trying to figure out D&D travel times on foot, because marching assumes that you're in a big column, that you have wagons with you that are carrying a bunch of your gear, a bunch of your supplies. It assumes that you are not marching in a place where you think that you're going to get attacked, because that immediately drives down your pace when you have to be at the ready, which adventurers usually are, because there's always a chance that you're going to run into a random encounter. So they're always wary, they're always scouting and looking for things, so they're already moving slower than a forced march, essentially. So needless to say that I did a bunch of research about this and have my own personal experience from doing a bunch of backpacking, and being like, hey, 2.3 miles for a walking pace is pretty decent over any sort of terrain. And since it's we're talking about a medieval-esque kind of world, medieval-inspired world, let's put it that way. Medieval-inspired world, where there's not like great flush graded roads and things like that you're walking along. This is particularly for crawling, so you are searching hexes, you're looking around, you're doing that sort of stuff. 2.3 miles or 2 nautical miles is a pretty good, is a perfectly acceptable average pace for walking around. So there are 19 of these hexes within each of these county hexes. So it's very easy to figure out how many of those are in an Atlas hex, which I don't know off the top of my head. So there are 19 league hexes. I pulled up a calculator, I'm just doing the calculations. For every county hex. There are 31 county hexes in region hex. And there are 31 region hexes in Atlas hex. So, just to really put it in perspective, let me swap back over the other guy. I just did the math, and we're gonna unveil the math. But let's let me flip this back up. Okay, so that's our world map, right? Which has 60 by 30 Atlas hexes. Each one of those Atlas hexes has 18,259 league hexes within it. So to say that this is an insane amount of detail, it is truly an insane amount of detail that you can drive down to very, very quickly. You can be like, oh, that's that. Let's do that times 60 and then times 30. So in case you're wondering, it's getting very close to 33 million hexes. So the amount of detail that you could build out into this world is insane. Now, am I prepared to do that? Absolutely not. I'm not going to be doing 33 million hexes. And again, most of those hexes will be empty, because most of those are deep ocean hexes that have nothing going on in them. But even if you take 30% of 33 million, that's still a lot of millions of hexes to do league hexes for. The idea is that you find wherever you want to start your campaign in, or your my D&D campaign. I'm like, oh, like in this circumstance, let me do a paintbrush. Yeah. Nice, easy color. There we go. I can make this a little larger. Let's make about 10. Yeah, 10's pretty good. So the current campaign that I'm running in is right here. And that dot is appropriately sized, which I don't think you can see very well. Let me zoom in. It's right here. They're in the Gold Sea, which is this area right here. And they are on an island in the Gold Sea. And that is the campaign. We've been running it for half a year. They've been on the island the entire time, or getting to the island and being on the island the entire time from the mainland. So yeah, they know about a little bit about the city they're from, which is in this area, and they know the Geech Mazan, which is this river right here. But yeah, they're on an island in the middle of this sea, and we've been running that for half a year at this point. That's just where it is, man. But it gives you an idea of like the scale of the world. All things considered, is be like, oh, this world is massive, because it truly is an Earth-like. And then you can really, really drill down. But it means that when I'm working about a campaign, I really only need to. You can run basically an entire campaign in one of these Atlas hexes, which will give you more than enough fodder for an entire game, an entire campaign of 1 to 20 if you want to. So it's very nice to be like, oh, I have a world map that I can literally run however many games I ever want to run within this world, and they'll never be in the same place. They'll never have the same thing that's going on, and I'd never need to do any more like top-down world building than this. Like, this will be it. Everything that I could use in multiple lifetimes if I wanted to. If you're interested in making a map like this, again, not something you need to do to run D&D. It's just a thing that I do to run D&D. But if you're interested in something like that, you can go check out the blog where I go into a lot of this, doing that top-down world building. You can see how I got to essentially this map, and that's redragonfiend.com. You can go check out. There's a whole world building section. Just open up the tab, go down there. It'll literally walk you step by step into getting this, and beyond this, actually, because we go into points of interest as well, which is what we're supposed to be talking about. Even though I've spent 45 minutes not talking about that, or 40 minutes not talking about that. So, I did want to show you kind of the basics of that. So that's how these things are laid out. Let me, not looking at the same thing I'm looking at. I gotta flip you back over. So it kind of gives you the scale. So that's, the scale is very important. That 1, 2, 3, 4 scale, that it goes from Atlas hex to region hex to county hex to league hex. Let me do this. This is silly. I don't actually need to do this, but it's going to make my brain happy, so I'm going to do it anyways. I'm going to bold that so it looks like a title. There we go. Perfect. Get out of here. That gives you the idea of like how it drills down very, very easily. And now let's do this right column, which should be shorter. So within that, each one of these hexes at each level, this works across levels. I look at area development. This green you can see in the middle is the heartlands. That's the civilized area. That's where you're going to have the most points of interest. It's the most developed area, essentially. There's so many people there, living there, and have built things there. That's sort of the heartlands area. This yellow ring around it is the frontier, or the marches. There's about, so to really, really throw it down, we can go ahead and talk about this area right here, which is the point of interest occurrence. So in this heartlands area, this central area, the most developed area with people, there is a 5, you roll a d6, and 5 out of 6 times you're going to have a point of interest there. So there's actually you can't walk very far before you run into a point of interest. As you get out here to the marshes, there's only a 50% chance that you're going to run into a hex. There's a 1 through 3 is it. And once you get out here, this red ring around it is the wilds, the full wilderness of the world. Because again, the world that I'm running is not fully settled. There's still like large tracts of land that don't really have a bunch of humanoid touch to it. It hasn't really been developed or settled or anything like that. Fully unsettled, fully wild. And once you get out there, you have even fewer. There's only a 1 in 6 chance. So about 1 in 6 is what? 16, 17%? 16 and some change percent chance that there's going to be basically 1 out of 6. There's a 1 out of 6 chance that there's going to be a point of interest there. So you will run across things. Of course, once you get out there, there are things that are or are not humanoid created and worked. And that rolls right down into, so we talked about this is the point of interest occurrence table. That's what we were just talking about. So what I really want to point out specifically is on this chart is the Heartlands option. So if you roll a 1 or 3 on that D6, you roll a D12 on the point of interest table. If you roll a 4 or 5, you roll a D20. On the frontier and in the wilds, you always roll a D20. But when you're in the Heartlands, there's a chance that you'll roll a 1D12 instead of 1D20. And you'll see this on this point of interest table below, which is the point of interest table I use to stock all these hex maps. As you'll see, there's a break here, so I know where the 12 is. And so these 12, the first 12 are the things that are more likely to happen in a more civilized area. You're more likely to have settlements. You're more likely to have holdings, which are like manor houses, estates, things of that nature. You're more likely to have religious sites, churches, cathedrals, temples, monasteries, nunneries, priories, all that sort of stuff. You're more likely to run across travel havens. That's your classic roadside inn, staging inn, that kind of thing. More likely to run across crossings. So I have crossings and settlements here, as I have holdings or fortifications. So most of these things also come with a settlement attached to them. So settlements have those 4 bands, right? We have one that is like 60,000 plus for our Atlas side, which are large capital cities. You have regular cities, which are about 1 through 60,000 population. Then you have villages that are about 400 to 1,000. And then you have steadings or hamlets that are about 50 people to, well, hamlets, which are about 50 people to about 400 people. And then you have steadings, which are the lowest level, which only show up when they're attached to something else that's on this point of interest table. So you might have any sort of holding or fortification. So if it's a knight's estate or something like that, they have a small settlement that comes with that has up to 50 people that are in it that do, like, who are your field laborers. They're your peasants who do all that stuff, as well as that also includes like your blacksmith and things like that. And so holdings come with that, religious sites come with that, travel havens come with that, crossings come with that, monster layers sometimes come with that. And then we start getting into areas where they're not as common. So we have, or we leave off crossing. After that, you have a monster layer or a creature layer. It's important to remember when we're talking about monster layers, because these come up. You might think, oh, that's weird to have a monster layer that shows up in this D12. They come up very often. Number one, we need adventure sites. This is a game of D&D, right? They have to go to places and do things, and D&D by its nature is a very location-based adventure kind of system, and I'm perfectly fine with that. And you might think, oh, well, that seems weird that there would be more monster layers in civilized lands than uncivilized lands, like unsettled lands. Like, there should be more in the wilderness and the marches, right? You're like, yes, but remember that a layer in this context also includes humanoids. So there are tons of bandits, bandit keeps, and robber barons, and all sorts of people who are just bad people doing bad stuff to good people. So there's lots of that as well. 7 is a meeting place. That's usually like where they hold like tribal moots or I mean, that's the easiest description. It's like a tribal mood. It's a place where people meet. It's a meeting place. Usually outdoor. It's like a neutral territory. It's between like, often between two people's holdings, or it's a place where, in addition to the civilized lands that are settled and under the control of some sort of formal administration or nation state or whatever it is, there are what I call hill folk. There are people who live on the fringes and beyond civilization. It's very sort of like people. I mean, they're hill folk. That is the term. They're people who are not part of the nation, who live on the fringes of society, who live outside the bounds of the state, essentially. And so a lot of the meeting places are between people who are in the civilized lands and people who are not. And they're like, okay, this is an area we come and meet and we talk about stuff whenever there's an issue or trying to get something across. So it's kind of a neutral place that we agree to meet at, and where we're not going to kill each other, essentially. In addition to that, there's the isolated homestead. There's lots of hermits in my world. There's lots of people who live off by themselves. Sometimes they are just people. Sometimes they're neutral monsters who have just made a home for themselves, but aren't immediately killed by adventurers because they don't seem to be doing any particular evil. It also includes things like retired adventurers. So high-level adventurers that have retired that you can go meet to. This is where isolated homesteads also include things like mage towers that you can throw in your world and be like, oh, there's like a weird wizard who lives off by himself in that tower over there. And, you know, he's super powerful, but he's very, he's powerful and or influential, so we don't call those people crazy. We call them eccentric. He's eccentric and lives off by himself over there. But you can totally, you know, maybe make some sort of deal to get some sort of power from him or get him to do something for you. He or she, you know, whatever. You can go meet that spellcaster or that former adventurer. They can give you information. They can potentially give you gear. They can... Retired adventurers, as we know playing D&D, you end up with a whole bunch of magic items, usually by the end of a campaign. And so it makes sense that you would retire, and then somebody more adventurers show up and ask you about something. You might literally like bequeath something to them. Be like, look, you can take this +1 sword I've had for 20 years that I'm not using for anything, and also I have like a +3 sword now. So you can have this +1 sword as a payment. Hey, go do something for me. And, you know, bada bing, bada boom, you got yourself a quest. Get yourself an adventure that you can write up very easily off of one of these points of interest. So the isolated homesteads work like that. There's 9 is omen, information, or warning, some sort of symbol or sign. It can literally be, you know, the classic road sign that's got the arrows pointing in different directions and telling you where to go. It can be like the, you know, no trespassing, keep out sign that's got like a skull on it. It can be an omen, like it can be like a hanged man tree kind of thing. You can work this however you want to add some flavor into the world. Basically, it's an area that just like gives you information about stuff that's going on. And 10 is some sort of natural resource site that's usually a spring, a water spring. It could be some sort of specific, this is where a very specific plant grows, anything like that. This is it can be a silkworm plantation or plantation, and you're right, I have different levels when I'm going through it, where it's like, oh, this is a natural resource that nobody stumbled across before, and you're the first people to find it if you want to capitalize upon it, all the way up to being like, no, there's like a formal like institution like plantation thing that is, or mine, like a formal mine that is working this, and so there's a bunch of buildings, a bunch of people here. So it runs that full gamut from like nobody's ever found this to be like, no, people know this and are actively exploiting this natural resource. Natural resources cover everything from, like I said, water up to flora and fauna, minerals, anything like that. After that is, this is one that I actually don't see. Number 11 is one that I don't ever see in a lot of hex stalking things, which is a construction site. where you just roll a d10, and one of the 10 things we've already talked about now, they're building that, essentially. So it shows the world, like, in progress. Nothing's just, like, always there. Occasionally there are people who are like, we're building an inn. And so you see it the first time, you see their construction, you come back next time, they're further along in the construction. Come back the third time, they finish the construction, and now they're, like, staffing the place. Those sorts of things. As well as construction can actually be ceased. It can be like, oh, this was an abandoned project. Why was it abandoned? Is the current thought that an adventurer might have? I don't know. You gonna spend time to investigate that? What's going on with this place? You're gonna talk to people who are in the area and be like, oh yeah, they were building and this includes the monster layers. Oh yeah, there was some kobolds who showed up here like a year ago and started making a fort. Then they abandoned it for some reason. I don't know why they did that. And immediately you're like, okay, adventurer, what happened here? Why were the kobolds building a fort? Is there a dragon in the area? Things like that. If you have curious players, they will want to investigate that stuff. If you don't have curious players, you know, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that you don't have curious players who want to learn more about what's going on in the world that you have and the world they're playing in. That's tough. I commiserate with you. I have definitely been in that situation before. It's very difficult to have players who don't buy into the world. And the easy answer, of course, is like, well, get better players. But I mean, you know that's not real. That's easier said than done. As well as a lot of hurt feelings along the way. The idea is trying to get them interested in the world, which is a much more difficult task than... You can lead the horse to water, but making them drink the water is a much more difficult thing. So there's the construction, and then on 12, I roll twice and combine. Let's say that I was going to do that right now. Let's do that. Alright, 6 and 9. So this is an area that there is a monster lair. And some sort of omen or information or warning. Probably a warning about that monster lair. That's a sign that's like, keep out. Or, you know, dragons be here kind of thing. So you can run across something that's an omen or warning sign and be like, oh. And you also see the actual monster lair. And again, monster layers can just be humans in this world, which happens quite often. It'd be like, oh, there's some sort of like Robin Hood-esque, Robin Hood but bad, some sort of bandit hideout that's in the area. And you might have a sign that's like, beware bandits, banditry, rampant banditry in this area. Like, oh, do we want to follow this road? Do we want to go around it? Maybe take a different path to get to where we're going to, because this looks like it might be a bad place. It's nice because it gives you a warning of the thing that you can literally telegraph what's coming up by doing that. Or, you know, if it's like bandits or a monster or something like that, you can do like the hangman tree and be like, oh, there's a bunch of people like impaled on pikes that are like lining the road and stuff like that. Maybe they have signs around them or something. Like to tell you why they're impaled there. You're like, ooh, I don't know, man. I don't know if we want to go this way. Do we want to deal with these people or not? Or you may be hired specifically to go deal with those people. And the nice thing is, like, if you were doing that omen sign, if you were doing that thing where there's like impaled people lining the road or something like that, that number 9, that omen information or warning sign, you could literally come across some bandits or whoever they are putting a new corpse on a pike, and that could be a combat if you want it to be, or it could, if the players want it to be, or they could literally just ask information of those people. Be like, oh yeah, well, you know, this is our land, so if you pay us some money, we'll let you go through for free. Well, like unmolested, you can get through here, and nobody will attack you if you pay us. Now, as we all know, players are never want to pay people, NPCs for basically anything. So that will probably resolve in a fight, most likely. And that should be like a super easy fight, and then be like, oh well, now you're on the timer. You don't tell the players that. You're like, oh, well, now you guys are on the timer because these people are expected back probably within the hour. And if they don't come back, then people come looking for them. If they find them killed on the road, now you've got a vendetta. They find you in the area because you haven't made it through the area yet. You know, it's very easy to figure out, oh, that's where the adventure happens. You're like, oh, now you have bandits who are actively coming after you. So, when you roll a Heartland Hex, one of these green guys, you roll a d12 and you get one of those 12 results on this point of interest table. One of these guys. Now, if you roll a 5, or you either roll a 5 on a Heartlands Hex, or you roll basically any other roll on the point of interest table, you'll roll a full d20, which gives you access to the last 8 as well, which allows you to roll on ruins or conflict areas, no trespassing areas, treasure rumors, wandering monsters, landmarks, remains, and hazards. So, ruins are... You'll notice the runes don't show up very often in Heartlands, because that makes sense. Because that's just how it works. It's like, anytime that they're... Especially pre-industrial times, anytime there is a ruin or something, people actually go and grab those building materials and use them for themselves. So ruins, they either rebuild the place, or they steal the building materials from that place for their own use. So ruins just kind of eventually take care of themselves. They just aren't around very often. They just don't show up very often, because people will go and they'll either, you know, grab stuff out of that, or will rebuild the place. That's why it's a very interesting thing that happens when we think about D&D. We often think about like ruined castles and things like that, but the truth is there aren't very... Historically, there weren't very many ruined castles, because anybody who came across a castle that wasn't occupied, that was only half built, they just rebuilt it and occupied it. And that's what they did with it. If it was abandoned for whatever reason, or those people were killed and they didn't... It was either fully torn down so nobody could use it against them, whoever the attackers were, or it was abandoned for whatever reason, that somebody comes back and they rebuild the castle. They take it over and they'll be like, cool, I got a half-built castle. That saves me like 50% of building a castle. So I'm just going to take what's here and just finish the building. So you'll often see that if you look at castle ruins, where they've gone through like generational changes and stuff like that. Really cool. So they don't show up that a bunch in the Heartlands, but as you get further and further into the frontier, there's fewer people who take over those buildings. They're more likely to be abandoned or fall into disuse for whatever reason. You're more likely to come across ruins. And ruins include like things like castles. So when you roll a ruin, you roll a d12 essentially. And we'll do that again. We rolled a d12. So let's say we came across some ruins in the frontier. What kind of ruin did we come across? A 10. What was a 10? Natural resource site. So this is one of the things where I like to use the silkworm farm. It's always the one that jumps to my mind, so we'll just go ahead and use it. No, we'll change it. I'll stick with plantation though. Some sort of plantation, whether it's like tobacco or marijuana or whatever. Poppy fields. Somebody's growing something here as a resource with our 10. But this place has fallen into ruin. You might go, okay, what is the reason this thing has fallen into ruin? Was it attacked? I just watched The Legend of El Cid, which is an Amazon show in Spanish. And they go and they burn down the Emir's mulberry plantation, essentially, that they were using to make silk for silkworms. There's a bunch of mulberry trees that is what silkworms eat. And so it was essentially a silk plantation. They're making silk there. And they didn't give this guy, the king, the taxes they were supposed to, their protection money essentially, and the guys were like, all right, well, we're just going to burn down your place. And now suddenly they're willing to pay. Like, oh, yeah, that's right. You didn't pay us, so the thing happened. a quick reminder, if you're doing a D&D style world or anything like that, is that taxes are basically racketeering. Essentially, you're basically paying protection money to a guy with a whole bunch of soldiers, so other people with other soldiers don't, rape and pillage your land. So, if you don't pay that guy, they're likely to also rape and pillage your land. So it's not a great system for the average person. It is firmly an abuse of power, and it should feel like that too. You can really set that up, and it'll feel very realistic. Like already having a knight or a baron or whoever it is in place and being like, oh, this person is actively pressuring you, pay your taxes, whether you have it or not. You get into a very Robin Hood, Sheriff of Nottingham kind of situation. Where you're like, the guy in charge is a bad dude. And he is really making things tough for us. But also, if we don't pay him, in addition to just the random vagabonds that are around who might, pillage, do all that classic stuff, it might also just be that Sheriff of Nottingham who just comes and does it too, as well. So now, instead of being protected from all that stuff, you're in fact doubling up the likelihood that will happen to you. It's a bad time. It's a bad time for everybody. It's not a great system. Not a great system for the common man. So that was ruins. We're talking about conflict area. This is any area. It's cool to throw them in the world. I was always inspired by this one, by The Witcher 3, where you go and you visit. Oh gosh, the Emperor's war camp. There's a war camp in it, and you go and visit them, and they're like, oh, they're encamped here. And so that's like a conflict area thing. It's like, oh, you can just go visit an army that's encamped here. Or you can find a battleground that's happened, which also happens multiple times in Witcher 3, that you come across battlegrounds. So you can find those sorts of things. So it always feels like the world is doing stuff. And because it's D&D, it can be like, oh, this doesn't necessarily have to be like guys in red tunics fighting guys in blue tunics. You can be like, oh, no, this is clearly where they were fighting like dryads, or... one of the ones that I have in the current campaign I'm running are some, I think it's Darrow, who are hunting like cockatrices or something, like a cockatrice warren that they are actively hunting. So a conflict area doesn't necessarily have to mean a battlefield. It can mean a number of different things. It just means that there are two separate parties that are in conflict about something, open conflict about something. And sometimes that point of interest is before the battle. Sometimes it's during the battle. Sometimes it's after the battle. Like I said, you can go find haunted battlegrounds and stuff like that. Like you can go, it rains a whole bunch, and the stuff from the Somme comes to the surface, or the Ardennes comes to the surface from old World War I stuff. You're like, ugh, it's not great. Not a fun time. But you can run across stuff like that as well. Except it's D&D, so those things are like actively haunted, or they're undead, or whatever. You walk across an old battlefield that people are in, and you come across it, and then the skeletons start pulling themselves out of the wet mud and start attacking you with their... It's a cool encounter. You can just be like, oh, you're just traveling the world, and this thing happens, and if you spend time, you can learn more about the battlefield and what was going on with it, and everything that has to do with it. You can do all that stuff. So after conflict area is no trespassing area. No trespassing area generally is like a hill folk kind of thing. It's people or creatures. There's some sort of... You shouldn't be here. It's an area where you come across some signage that's like, hey, don't be here. Don't trespass here. I mean, you might have all sort of like the hills have eyes kind of thing, where you have a whole bunch of weird hill folk that are there. It can be like, oh no, you see the rubbings on these trees. This is obviously like a dire bears. hunting grounds or whatever. Like this is their territory, so we probably shouldn't hang around here. Might want to give this a wide berth. This is a great area when you have those no trespassing areas to throw. In addition to a lot of D&D monsters, like big solo monsters that have like layer actions, a lot of them have this effect that they have on the land around them. This is a great way to drop in stuff like that. Be like, oh, there's an area, and you run across this area that's I'm trying to think. The Black Dragon has stuff. There's something that deals with the swamp. It might just make swampland. I can't remember. You know what? Let's just look it up. Black Dragon. And let's go with Ancient. Sure, it's right here at the top. Because this usually tells us additional layer actions, regional effects. Yeah. None of these monsters have regional effects. Ennui. Creatures that spend a year within 10 miles of the dragon's lair are filled with listless despair, which is a great way to be like, you come across people who are just like crushed spiritually. Especially with something like a dragon who often employs people, whether that's kobolds or literal people. They tend to be lords in their own right over the land. Be like, oh yeah, Strahd's very like that too. People will be like, yeah, I mean, like, we serve Strahd. It's not great. They're filled with that. Barovia is very much like that, where everybody's kind of filled with that ennui kind of aspect. Raiding spies. Killing obnoxious birds, bugs, and reptiles follow any humanoid creature unknown to the dragon within 6 miles of the lair, imposing disadvantage on dexterity stealth checks. Now, normally when you're playing D, you'd be like, oh, 10 miles away or 6 miles away. That sort of idea is not... it's not very... It's hard to fold into the narrative of actually running the game. Especially if you're not playing a hex-crawl style game. You'd be like, what is... How far away is 10 miles from the Black Dragon's lair? You're like, I don't fucking know. I don't know. They run across it like the day before they travel there, I guess. But they already know the creature's there, so it's not really... But if you're running a hex crawl, this makes a lot more sense. Where you're like, oh, 10 miles, I know that's essentially a county hex. Be like, okay, that's one of these guys. Over here. Hold on. Yep. One of these guys over here on the left. Be like, oh, yeah. Once you guys enter this area, and actually it's 10 miles away from it, so it would be like, imagine this green guy, right, is the Dragon Slayer. Basically, anytime that you hit one of those yellow surrounding hexes, it'd be like, oh, there's a bunch of people that seem... People who are very listless. They're very much suffering for that ennui, and they'd be like, and it's like a very distinct departure as you move into that area. And then we know 6 miles, it's very easy to be like, oh, well, that's 3 local hexes away. Up to 3 local hexes away. That these animals start following you. You seem like, oh, there's a bird who seems to be paying particular attention to you guys and following you as you walk. And you find this very weird. Rotting domain. Stinging bugs are aggressive and the air is heavy with the odor of rot within 6 miles of the lair. So a lot of this stuff, like a lot of these regional effects, are really easy to fold into this idea of no trespassing areas, where you're going to enter an area where it's clear that you're not supposed to be here. And that should be notified to you in some way. That might be the fauna, like the birds and stuff, paying too much attention to you. That smell of rot on the air. The people who are here that you come across are very listless or whatever. All that kind of stuff. It should be very clear, telegraphed very clearly, that it'd be like, oh, you shouldn't be here. Like, this is a bad place to be. Treasure rumors? Yeah, they're just that. And be like, oh, there's a rumored sword of the ancients or whatever gobbledygook you're making up to be like, oh, I need to give my players some some sort of item. So I tell them about a lost sword or whatever that's supposed to be buried, or it's supposed to be in some sort of ruins or whatever it is, 5 miles to the west. And they can go explore it, and it's a little dungeon crawl, and they get the thing. Now, the treasure rumors, the way that I work them, is that sometimes they're not real. Sometimes they're just stuff people say. So there's a chance that you go and you find something, and they're like, oh, it's actually not that thing. They sometimes tell you the wrong information. In general, you want to err on the side of truth with your players, because it's not super fun as a player to be like, oh, somebody tells me a rumor about some sort of adventure. You go to do the adventure and be like, there's no adventure here. With these treasure rumors, one of the things that happens when you run across people that tell you about a treasure rumor that is fake is sometimes they're literally just creating an ambush for your characters. There are local bandits or toughs or whatever, and they're like, look, somebody rolled into town with throwing a whole bunch of money around. We tell them about some random place they can go to check something out, and we'll just wait in ambush for them, and when they show up, we'll just rob them. That is the thing that happens in my world. It hasn't happened in my current campaign. They haven't run across that yet. There are a few treasure rumors on the island. Not very many. I think there's only like 2 or 3 that they could run across. There are like minor treasures rumors. There's one that was an opportunity I missed to give to them that they haven't come across. There's another one they just haven't come across. Just because they haven't been in that area of the island yet. And then I think there's one other somewhere else. I can't remember where. So, in addition to treasure rumors, there's wandering monsters. You can just run across things. This has happened in the campaign that we're running. They ran across a warforged perfumer. So they found this warforged that was stuck in the swamp, like up to his hips, just stuck in the mud. And they pulled him out, and he was trying to gather all these flower ingredients to make perfume. And told them, hey, if you want to go, there's a portal to essentially Mechanus. Like, that's where I'm going back. So if you guys, he was able to sell them and be like, he's a fully warforged, like has a mechanical mind where he's like, hey, if you guys want directions to some place that I know, I can give you directions to that place from this specific area. They paid for that to get to the portal to Mechanus, I believe, but then moved on from that location. It's like, all right, well, the moment you guys move on, those directions don't make any more sense. But that is the idea. I mean, they could spend some time and kind of figure out where it's supposed to be, but they definitely wouldn't have as good of, like, it would have been no roll, no check required to get there if they had just followed the directions when they got them. But to be fair, they were busy doing other stuff. This was just a random encounter they had, because it is, as it stated, a wandering monster. You encounter them once and then they're just gone. But they can always come back later. So this NPC they like, so there's a chance that they might run into that warforged NPC again at some point. Maybe he'll be wandering somewhere else and get stuck in more mud, because they are in a very sort of swamp and marsh heavy area, so there's a lot of mud. After that is landmark. That can be an artificial landmark. We talked about like the Taj Mahal, Pyramids of Giza kind of thing. Could be a natural landmark, Niagara Falls, Victoria Falls, Cardinal Red Oaks, any of that sort of stuff. And they're not oaks, right? Are they red oaks? Can't remember. Anyways, the Northern California area, Grand Canyons, anything like that, any sort of like natural terrain landmark. It's really good if you play something like Civilization. They usually have those sort of like natural world wonders that you can pull from. I also use the UNESCO Heritage. So that's a quick easy hack for you dungeon masters out there. If you want to make some sort of like world known location, you can just go to the UNESCO Heritage site and just kind of roll through their heritage sites and pick something that seems cool and be like, yeah, this is what's in the world. that people know about. Those are easy ones to do. Any sort of historical landmarks, things of that nature. 19 are some remains. So ruins are places. Remains are generally creatures or vehicles. This can be the thing where it's like you find a shipwreck is a remain. You can find maybe a wagon that's been attacked and burned and some dead corpses around. You find one of the ones that's in my campaign world that they didn't decide to go after is they found they got told that, oh yeah, there's like a whale that's on a mountain, and we don't know how it got there or why it's there. They did not go investigate that, so one of the NPCs did, and the NPC has gone off to investigate that instead. One of the local priests has gone off to take a look at it. So you can add that stuff in as well. Very super easy to do that kind of thing. And then number 20 is hazards. It's just there's an area of land that's just not habitable for whatever reason. We have things we have the lavender blight, which is something that in my current campaign, the PCs are actively working on. Well, I should say they're on the road to finding out about the lavender blight. They have come across it, they just haven't been to the location yet. There's lavender blight that's like ripping up a forest. There is the murmuring hills that drive people mad because of the wind sound that makes the going through them. There's all sorts of weird stuff that happens, any of that stuff. So any of these things that I have are like, I break them down into 3 bands. They're either artificial, they're natural, or they're weird. So an artificial hazard might be like a cesspit, or like this is a place where we throw a bunch of our waste. It can be like a toxic waste place if you want to do something like that, or something that like some wizard screwed something up and now this part of the world doesn't work right. Like it's some sort of wild magic surge or something like that. That can be an artificial thing. Or there's a golem that's run amok or whatever you want. Which can be itself a hazard. You might consider that a hazard rather than a wandering monster, if you will. You're like, oh, there is a golem who is just guarding this random plot of land that's got nothing on it. And if anybody ever wanders into there, that golem just like kills the crap out of them. It's not great. So if you want to deal with that, that'd be great. If you wanna maybe get that golem gone, that'd be super, super helpful for us. But hazards also include things like, they can just be natural hazards. They might be, quicksand, tar pits, sinkholes, anything like that. It can just be things that they run across. It can just be natural hazards. And then you can have weird hazards too that are like, oh, this is some sort of like planar thing that's going on. It's like, oh, this is an area of woods you don't want to go into because it's like the Fey Woods, and if you go in there, like a bunch of weird trippy stuff's going to happen to you. So maybe avoid that if you know it's good for you. Or there's like a fairy ring or something that's in it. It might transport you to the Feywild, etc. So those are the points of interest. So 13 through 20 only happen when you roll the d20, obviously, rather than d12, which means that these things typically show up more often in the frontier and wilderness areas, rather than the super civilized areas, which typically you're often rolling a 1d12 on. So it's unlikely in the civilized areas you're going to run across ruins, or conflict areas, or no trespassing areas, or treasure rumors. You could run across a trespassing area. A good one would be like a Kingswood or something like that, where there's like a royal forester who's like, yeah, you guys can't be in this wood. This is a domain of the king, and you can't be here, or queen, or whoever it is. You can't be here. There's generally not very many wandering monsters that are in the civilized lands. Most of those either have their bulwarks, they have their layers, and you don't run across too many like highwaymen or things like that even bandits that might hop out or attack you, much less like a band of ravaging orcs are probably not going to show up very often in the Heartlands, because that it's well administered, and there's, instead of a band of orcs, there's like a knight and his retinue who's roaming around the land, making sure there's not orcs rampaging through the lands, essentially. And not going to come across too many landmarks. Just like today, most of the big landmarks that we think of, whether they are natural wonders or sometimes even artificial ones, they're generally not around a super populous area. I mean, the artificial ones kind of are, I suppose. Also, with each one of these, there is a likelihood they will be occupied. Because I'm thinking about Christ Redentor, Statue of Liberty, very common one, Eiffel Tower, very artificial ones, Taj Mahal, and like they're built within cities, or necessarily they were built and then like cities grew up around them. It's a little column B. But yeah, you can still have that. But like, you look at something like Niagara Falls, and you're like, well, there's not really like there's not a huge settlement around that. There's like, it's a touristy kind of place. It's a sightseeing place. There are people who live in and around there, but not a ton. You're less likely to come across remains because people find remains and remove them or whatever. And not as many hazards, obviously, because there's not going to be people living in an overtly hazardous area most of the time. So those aren't going to show up in Heartlands. Heartlands will not develop around those places. Which, this was a big thing to kind of jump into the 3 powers. I've wasted almost a huge portion of the stream talking about this aspect of it, which I wasn't planning to do, but that's how it goes. So what we're going to do is we're going to jump into the hex stopping upgrade area, because this is the document that I use when I'm actually doing points of interest, and you'll see all the same stuff that was in there in here, except in excruciating detail. Well, or at least more detail. Not excruciating. But we're going to add some more stuff into it, because we're going to talk about adding royals and nobles and church titles into game world, and how that's super beneficial for you. But before we do that, I'm going to take a quick break. I'm going to refill up on my coffee, and I'll be back in just a few minutes. So hang on tight. We'll come back, and then we're going to get really into the titles and building them out and where they kind of fall within that 4-level hex. 4 levels of hex that I use for world building. So hang on for just a moment, and we'll be right back. All right? If you have any questions, this would be a great time to drop those questions too. let's go ahead and jump back in. All right. So I'm talking about that royal, noble, and the church. The sort of three powers that work in and kind of focus directly in on adding not just realism to a very Western European medieval-esque, Renaissance-esque kind of world in which D&D is the groove in which D&D lives within, but also this aspect of this is a great way to create friction and conflict within the world because those three parties don't always play nice with each other. So the first thing that I want to show about it is I think we're going to just go down to, I think holdings will be the best thing. Let's go down to holdings. Sorry. I'm looking for one other thing. There we go. Da-da-da. Okay. Why is that doing that? I'm not sure. One moment. I don't know what that's doing that. Right this way. Okay, I guess that worked for whatever reason. Alright, sorry. I'm trying to stream stuff. Alright, so we're going to talk about, so holdings or fortifications, that's usually like a manor house or an estate. It's usually where these people live. And most of the time, we'll see right here, this is where the furry meat is made. If we look at the September 87 reference. So rolling a d10 and being like, and you could just make this a d20 chart, you just double everything. So about 40% of that should be, anytime you run across a holding or fortification, it should be held by a noble. Remember, this does not include monster layers, which could also be a holding or fortification. If it was a, I'm thinking very much, again, just because we were talking about it earlier, Witcher 3, obviously the iconic quest from that game is the quest that deals with the Baron, the Bloody Baron, and who is himself a robber baron, a person who has basically taken over a castle and been like, I'm just gonna keep it, I think. And there's a war going on, so nobody else is like stopped him from doing it. But those would fall under like monster layers and not necessarily holdings or fortifications. These are considered to be roughly neutral NPCs. That's going to depend a lot on your campaign, but in general, they're not supposed to be like this is a adventure location most of the time. At least not in the context of D&D, like you're going through halls, killing everything you find. Now, it could be a social adventure location, for sure. You might go to the hall, there might be a feast that's happening there, or a dance or a ball or some sort that you've been invited to, and you're there to hobnob or maybe get favor out of nobles that are in attendance, etc. And other very important people who are going to be all coming together in one room, so you opportunity to get in front of a bunch of faces very quickly. But anytime you come across a holding or fortification, there's a 40% chance it's going to be a noble. So that's our barons, our earls, our counts, our viscounts, our baronets, our knights, all the way up to archdukes and princes. You could just literally be at the king's castle, which actually would fall under noble, strangely enough, and not. Though the likelihood it's going to be a king is very slim. There's not a lot of kings, surprisingly, in our land management. There's a 30% chance it's going to be some sort of crown region. So this is an area of land or location that is held specifically by the crown, and it's not assigned to any particular noble. Instead, there is somebody who is watching over this as an envoy of the royal family. So they're appointed in that role. So they're not like a noble who has family ties to the land, and they can inherit it from their parents, etc. It's not passed down through the family line. It's like, nope, you are hired to be this guy. and you get a salary or whatever it is, which is usually part of your taxation. That's usually how that works. But that person is you essentially administer government land is what you do as a crown regent. So I played in the last campaign full campaign that I finished. I played a Viscount who the entire time was only referred to by the other players as the Viscount, even though he fully has a name. He was just never called by his name. He was always just called Viscount. But he played as a Viscount, and he was not a noble by this tradition. I mean, he wasn't at all, because he was pretending to be one. He was absolutely... He pulled the long con for the entire campaign of being a charlatan and being like, oh yeah, I'm definitely a Viscount. He was introduced that way, and nobody ever questioned it. But he was not a noble. He did not have land holdings. He was essentially what you would call a crown regent. He had... His Viscount was like an office that he performs as part of the empire. Or at least that's what he lied about it. So it made sense that he didn't have any land. He didn't have like an estate that he needed to manage. He's like, no, it's my crown title. It's a job essentially that I have. So there's 30% chance that that's going to be anytime you come across any sort of estate or manor house or castle, that it's going to be run by a castellan or a steward of the royal family, essentially. And then there's a 20% chance that it's a church official that you might run across, a bishop's personal land holdings, etc. And then 10 is an independent domain. That is a domain that this person has that's outside the current standing. This is a thing that happened. It's a little weird to think about in the modern context, especially in the US, but definitely is a thing that happened for a long time, where it's be like, oh, these people have lived here for like lots of generations and they're kind of powerful, and so they're on our side, but we're gonna let them kind of administer their own domains within our country. It's very much like a Vatican within Rome kind of situation, where they're like, oh, you have your own thing, but it's also utterly surrounded by our entire country. Our entire nation. Or in this case, probably a kingdom or an empire. So let's detwin. So automatically we can see that this gives us a lot more options than your standard, oh, here's a baron that lives in the castle or whatever. There's whatever knight that lives in whatever castle. It's not important. We can actually make that important in D&D, and it's super useful if we do. Because immediately it gives us four different people who could be... four different types of people with their own kind of motivations that are kind of baked in based off of who they are, who might be in this castle. So it could be a noble. So nobles are great, because nobles primarily support the crown, but also are very self-motivated because that is their lands. And there are lots of plots, and whether you watch history stuff, if you watch a bunch of, like, taking a bunch of history where you learn about, oh, well, nobles are never, like, super gung-ho for the king. But also if you watch a lot of television shows or series that deal with basically being historical drama or historical fantasy kind of situations, we see that a lot in, I'm thinking of the shows that like Vikings. Oh gosh, what is the our Cornwall one? I'm gonna kick myself in the butt for not knowing that. The books are Cornwell. He does the Sharp series, which is fantastic. It's, if you want to see a young Sean Bean in something, they made some movies off of the Sharp books, which is like a Napoleonic. I'd call it basically a Napoleonic kind of James Bond style novels, if you like that kind of stuff. And they're military history, fantasy things that take place during that time period. Okay, so this is the newest book in the series that he was doing, I think. The Last Kingdom. There we go. That's the name of the series. Took me a long time. Last Kingdom, which is a Netflix show, I believe. You can check that out. It deals with a lot of stuff. You see a lot of these things where it's like, oh, the nobles are generally in alignment. They owe allegiance to the king or queen or whoever's the sovereign, whatever sovereign's in charge. But they also, like, they have their own holdings that are like their family's things, and those are like first and foremost in their mind. So there are ways, especially if the crown is demanding stuff from them, that there would be friction against very easily. So you can immediately start adding plots in that, and then if the players show up at that castle as envoys of the king, maybe they have a charter or whatever they're supposed to be doing, they're on a mission from the king, there's going to be some friction maybe with that noble, if that noble feels like they're being called to put out stuff for this, for these adventurers, that he doesn't really care about whatever they're doing. Or might have to do with something on his lands, his or her lands, that they don't like, that they're not inclined to be helpful with. Crown regions. Again, this is somebody who holds an office for the crown, essentially, and they administer these lands specifically for the crown. So they are likely to be pretty hawkish as far as the crown's interests. So if the adventurers are doing some classic adventure shenanigans on their land, they're gonna probably be upset with them, especially if they're doing stuff on crown lands that they have not asked about, they have not gotten an okay to do, they haven't done any of that stuff. So, could be an issue, probably likely an issue. But also, if they're there for the king, they're probably going to be given a pretty big opportunity. But this is also a situation where you can do something like a sheriff of Nottingham and be like, there are just like crooked people who work for the crown too, who are like, oh yeah, no, I'm absolutely embezzling a ton of tax money into my own stuff, and I have to, because I don't have any of these noble lands to hold on to. I don't have anything to my name. So everything I get, I have to steal from the crown, essentially. And I'm just in charge. And that can be a really great hook for a really classic D&D style, investigation style adventure, where you're like, you learn that the regent's been, taxing too much money, and they're not sending all the money to the crown. And you sit down and be like, okay, how do we catch them in the act? How do we prove this? How do we, get paid for it too? If they're not sent by the crown to be like, yeah, we think that this person's maybe embezzling money from us. After that is a church official. We have priests, bishops, archbishops, abbots, abbesses, priors, prioress. Anything. Church official could also include things like a fighting order. It could be like a Templars base, a chapter house for the Templars kind of situation. And let's go with that, because that's the easiest one to be like, oh, well, there's obviously going to be a lot of friction there. If you are either one of these guys, either a noble or somebody who's tied specifically to the crown, you're not going to be super happy if there's a base of soldiers essentially on your land that you're not in control of, like a Templars base. You're like, oh, there's these dudes that are basically like 20 to 50 fighting knights who I don't control and who are absolutely inside my borders at all times. So obviously there's going to be a bunch of friction there. Obviously there's, classically in history, there's a bunch of friction between kings and church. Especially, I'm thinking, the thing that always jumps to my mind when I think about that is Blackadder, the first season, the end of the first season, where who is it? Somebody's dying, and they're like, are you going to leave your lands to the church or the crown? And they're back and forth, and that's the whole thing. It's trying to get this dying person to either give their lands to the church or give their lands to the crown. back to the crown. And so that is the setup. That is basically that's most of the season, I think. Well, a good portion of the season. Back half of the first season. Blackadder, funny show. Go watch it sometime. But yeah, I mean, it's just a very easy thing to pick up on and throw into your D&D games and be like, oh yeah, like the king and the church are definitely not in agreement about stuff all the time. And classically, classic example of that would be the formation of the Anglican Church, essentially. King Henry's like, I want a divorce. And the Pope's like, you can't have a divorce. All right, well, gives them... and it's like, all right, well, there's no more church on my island, so, fuck you. Now we're a totally new, different church, and also I'm going to take back all your church lands, and they're all going to be crown lands now. So, yeah, pretty big thing. Surprising that there's not like a massive war over that, right? But you go back and you look at other things that were also going down in the world at that time, as far as the church was concerned, and understand like, oh, that's why the church didn't like do open war on England. So you understand that stuff, which is very different than like Spanish succession, which they do play a huge part in. So you might have church officials who hold those lands. Sometimes they hold them as their own nobility. So you could have somebody who is a bishop who is also you can have somebody who's a bishop who's also maybe a baron. And so they hold both holdings, which is a thing that happened pretty often, especially historically. You look at, usually it is the firstborn who inherits everything. So if you had a firstborn who inherited a barony, and then usually the latter children have to kind of make their own way. Usually a lot of them would go into the church as a way to sort of create their own wealth and create their own station. That's usually a good avenue for doing that, when you can't rely on basically your family's title, because you're not going to inherit that. But you do that, and then the firstborn dies, and then you're like, oh, well, I guess I'm the baron now too, but I'm also a bishop. I got a lot of stuff going on. And sometimes those holdings are not in the same place, actually, and often they would not be. If you were a bishop who was in charge of a oh my gosh, I'm gonna forget the term. Not a province. Province is what the metropolitan's in charge of. Oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm blanking on this. I'm just gonna bring it up. I know I have it in my notes right here. Diocese. There we go. A diocese. So a bishop would have their own diocese, but also might have land holdings as a baron somewhere else. Which is a very common thing that happens after... I guess Charlemagne. I don't know if Charlemagne's the first one. Charlemagne is such a massive figure as far as a change in administration and feudalism and working on that. I can't remember if it's either Carolingian, because it's going to be Charlemagne, or it's going to be what is it, Merovingian, which is right before Charlemagne, essentially his kind of dad and older brothers and stuff. But in one of those, there's reforms coming when they're like, hey, maybe we shouldn't let like nobles have all their land holdings in one consolidated areas. Instead, maybe we just like spread them out across the kingdom. And if we do that, that makes them a lot harder for them to consolidate power against us. You see a lot of building of central state power, specifically through Charlemagne and his approach to administration of the kingdom. Really like next level stuff. Really a guy who changed a lot of the game and was very much a patent going forward of being like, oh, this is how you should probably do this. So yeah, it's not unlikely that a noble can have multiple land holdings. So keep that in mind. especially if they're not next to each other. So you might have a kingdom where you have a guy who's, and you see this even today, especially in something like the English royal family, where they introduce somebody and they're like, oh, well, they're the Prince of Wales, but they're also the Earl of such and such, and the Count, or not Count, they wouldn't use Count, they use Earl, and the Baron of such and such. This idea, so there are people that have multiple land holdings. That was pretty common, especially in that sort of later, I hesitate to call it later medieval period, because it's definitely not. But yeah, then there is a change in that. So previous to Charlemagne, it's pretty common for a family or a person to hold all their land holdings together, and then later on it's like, oh, we should split these up so they can't consolidate their power against us, which is a concern for kings, because kings actually not super powerful most of the time. Usually most of their power is derived from the nobles themselves, so they're kind of a first among peers kind of situation. So the problem is like, if you start pissing off all your friends might kill you or might decide that they just don't want to follow you. They might have a little bitty baby coup. Maybe they just kill you and maybe make somebody else king. The first among peers. So that is something to sort of keep in mind. All right, so what does this look like? So this is what I want to really show you guys. I'm gonna wait so you guys can see it. Take it there. We've got our holding details. They have a manor house. They have a keep and bailey, and they have a moat or ditch. So it gives you the idea of what might be the primary hall. We could even call this a hall if we wanted to, instead of a manor house. Sort of like where they essentially hold court. What is the place that they live and work out of? And this tells you, it goes from a manor house, which would probably show up in most places that are either the person just got the thing so they haven't had a chance to build a keep, or it's in a very relatively safe area, so they're not super worried about attacks. If they're in the heartlands, you might have a manor house instead. Then you move on to a keep, and keep, big stone tower, essentially, that you live in. It's defensible. Keep and bailey. The moment you put basically a fence around around your keep, it becomes a castle. Like as soon as there's a bailey, which is ye olde way of saying courtyard, essentially open space between the walls and the buildings. And as we go down this, they get more and more fortified. All the way to the bottom where you're like, oh, there's a keep, there's an inner bailey, there's an outer bailey, which means there's at least 2 walls. They've got some sort of moat and ditch, and there's like a fortified gatehouse when people try to enter. So once we get down here, we get our hex size notes. This is what we're looking at, where Atlas level, you roll a d10. So one of the things is, as we talked about previously, is that most of these locations, any sort of fortification or holding of that nature, I put fortification because this could be like an imperial like fort. It could be just a held military location. It doesn't necessarily have to be like a noble's home and residence. That's usually what makes a castle, is that the person also has to just like live there. It has to be their home, which separates a castle from other types of fortification primarily. The fortification is like, oh, it's here specifically for defensive measures. And people do live here, but it's not like somebody's ancestral home. We have down here, if you're in the Atlas, which is right, those massive hexes, 6 degrees of longitude or latitude, 360 nautical miles, 400 and some change, right? Yeah, 414.28 normal miles, or 666.72 kilometers. So, and that's not the area, that's just side to side. So very large bits of land. Look at the wrong thing. So if you're in an Atlas hex, you roll a d10 to find out kind of like who if you come across this, who's seated here? Whose seat of power is here? If you get an emperor or a great or high king, they have their dominion is 8+ atlas hexes. That's like a huge portion of land that they're in charge of. You're thinking like a Roman Empire or a Mongol Empire. Almost always going to be an empire. It would be really weird if it wasn't. You could do that. You could end up with an area that didn't do that. Like, I guess you don't really consider. No, I guess they do consider Russia an empire during sort of that time period. I guess they do, yeah, because to constitute an empire, the only difference that makes a thing an empire is that it rules over different types or different. I was gonna say types of people, but different like cultural or societies, people. So it becomes an empire when Rome becomes an empire when you're not just in charge of Romans. As soon as you take something like Egypt, and you're like, oh well, there's also Egyptians too, who are under you, and like, all right, well now you're an empire. Because that's a totally different set of people with totally different culture and totally different society you got to deal with and roll over. So you could technically kind of end up being a great king or a high king, which would be like a king of kings, which would be a little bit more like a Holy Roman Emperor kind of situation. Where you're the king, but you're king of kings, essentially. So, you know, the old Jesus Christ probably has something to say about that. And as with the church, if you called yourself King of Kings. But essentially that is what a great king or a high king is. It's that you are... Kings sometimes get together and are like, oh, well, we're thrown in together to be a more powerful thing. So, more than an alliance or allyship. They're like, oh, we're actually going to get some multiple kings together and we're going to throw it together and be like, oh, well, you're going to be our high king. So, and then you get situations like pretty much any empire. That's the start of really any empire is kind of like that. After that, you get a normal king, 2 to 7 atlas hexes. So it's still massive, massive areas of land we're talking about. Under that is sort of Archduke, who also has a pretty sizable. Think about things like the Archduke of Austria. And the old Franz Ferdinand. Got the bullet. They also hold massive land holdings, like a country's worth of land holdings. Princes within that, the Prince of Wales, right? Wales is a kingdom within Great Britain. And so you have a prince who can be subservient to a king without necessarily always being a blood relation, though usually a blood relation. Usually that will be something like a younger son might get from a king. They might be the prince, and in England's case, you're just the Prince of Wales until you become king. Essentially, you get that title through the family. And so each one of these atlas locations, so anytime that one of these guys is going to show up and they're going to have their castle or whatever it is, and we put this note up here, for added verisimilitude, or this is just a $5 way to say historic, make it a little bit more historical, just roll 2d6 and take the higher result for your atlas or region points of interest, and lower for county or local hexes. So you're more likely to end up with like these if you're in the local hexes, and more likely to end up with these if you're in the higher end. They're almost assured to be in a keep with some sort of bailey. Some sort of pretty standard ass castle. They're gonna be in a castle. But those who are in the local area might only have a keep. Or they might just have a house. That's for atlas hexes. So those are the big ones, right? That's what these guys, big old hexes. Then we drop down and look at region hexes. So that drops us down a little bit. And we deal with different sort of noble titles in that same area. So the region would include a village, in addition to it. So again, a village. So a city is 1 to 60,000 people. A village is about, in my world, about 400 to 1,000 people live in a village. And in addition to that, so if you think of, and I'll save that. I'll save that example for later where it's more appropriate. So the prince might have a village that's, probably in the north end of close to 1,000 people, who basically are there specifically to serve the castle, essentially to serve the prince and their close land holdings. Like their chancellor would be in charge of that. Their chancellor and probably I guess their butler. They probably have somebody who actually manages that castle, though. Probably have some sort of castellan, so they don't actually do that much actual physical administration of the actual land that they are on. That way they can focus on political things. So we have our archdukes, we have our princes, we have our dukes. Not quite as powerful as archdukes. Also have grand dukes. Kind of, you can mix those in kind of wherever if you want that to be roughly prince level. If you didn't want to put a prince or princess in there for whatever reason, you might go, oh, well, they're a grand duke. And then a marquis or a margrave. These are very specific. So I have them in here, but sometimes I ignore this result if I get something like a marquis or margrave, which is the same as margrave or markgraf. It's essentially what you need to know is that a marquis is essentially the same level as a count or an earl. But the reason that they're higher up in the chain is that they are one of the people who hold the borderlands. They usually hold march holdings. So they are the line of defense for the kingdom or whatever nation state they're in. This is why you get the classic D&D keep on the borderlands. That would be probably the keep of a marquis or a margrave. Which I don't think is what it is actually in the module, right? I think it's a count. If I remember correctly. It's been a long time since I've looked at that module. But probably should be like a marquis or a margrave. So they usually have a little bit larger land holding than a count or an earl does. But they also are way more militarized and are often way more trusted by the king, because that's the person you really need to trust as the person who's supposed to keep your borders of your kingdom safe. You really want that person to be somebody you trust. So that's why it's slightly elevated over a count or an earl. And these are all the region hexes. So again, those region hexes are about 60 nautical miles, or about 69 miles, or 111 kilometers across. But their square area, that is significantly larger. But a region hex is something that takes roughly, if we go by our sort of 2 nautical miles an hour, generally march for about 10 miles in a day, 10 to 15 miles in a day, which fits very nicely. We didn't talk about this previously, but that also fits very nicely into counties, meaning that, if a league hex represents basically how much you can walk in an hour, a county hex represents essentially how long you can walk in a day. And the region, so the county hex is that, then the region hex is 6 times that, so it's roughly what you can walk in a week. Especially in my world, because I have a separate calendar which has 6-day weeks. So it works perfectly for me, but it's close enough. Usually when things do, even militaries marched historically, it's basically 2 marching days, then a rest day. So even within that, if you go, okay, well, they were resting probably at least 2 days during the week. So that means they're 4 to 5 days to go almost 70 miles. Sounds about right, traditionally. And that's truly marching. So it works pretty well for adventuring as well. And since an Atlas hex is just 6 region hexes across, that means that crossing a hex, Atlas hex takes about 10 weeks, or about a month and a half. Or sorry, like 6 weeks, right? So it takes about, I'm going 1 degree too high. So that's a week, so 6 weeks. So it takes about a month and a half to get across an Atlas hex if you're doing pretty much nothing but walking across it. So when we look at stuff like, I open? I did not. Yeah, I did. So when we're looking at, this is the wrong hex. Look at this, and you're maybe considering like, oh, I want to walk. We're in this area, and I want to travel to like here. And you're like, oh man, that's I'll just paint it. And you want to travel from there to like maybe there. Maybe there's a port town you want to take. Get a ship from. You're like, man, that's going to take you forever to walk. Like, this is going to take you a very long time, especially because I just pushed it essentially through a mountain range. So probably not going to work. That's one of the things where ship travel becomes so much more important because it's faster and easier. You go, oh, well, clearly I would probably go to here where there's probably a trade port and then go to that way. Go across the water because it will be faster because ships sail all hours of the day and night. You don't have to sleep. Well, I mean, you do. But the ship continues to sail even when because they work in shifts. So it would be faster. It's going to be a lot less stressful for you. And honestly, even though passage on a ship can be expensive, especially if you go by the D&D rules, because I think it's... I'm going to pull it out. I think it's a silver per 10 miles or something like that. I can't remember. Which is basically a copper a mile, I think. And you go like, oh, well, that's still... If we look at this, that's thousands of miles. Like, it's going to be an expensive passage. Ship travel is expensive to buy, like, boarding. Which is why it's primarily used for cargo. But that's not... I don't think we need to look at that anymore. Hop back over. Well... Yeah, we'll hop back over it. Because we'll come back to this. What? There we go. Yeah, why they did that. So that's our region hexes. Go down to our county, so we do that 3rd level hexes. And again, each of these levels of hexes ties into, because there's 4 of them, it's very neat and easy to wrap them directly into the 4 tiers of play for D&D. So, this region hex that we were just talking about, that's tier 3 adventures happen in that area. So it gives you ideas for what type of adventures should be tied to these kind of NPCs. So a Duke might give you your, 14th level party a mission for something. That's kind of the scale you're talking about. And this is somebody who's got probably the direct ear of the king. As a Duke or Marquis. But then we drop down to the county level. Which again is only about like 10 nautical miles across, which means that they can get pretty much to any place. Especially in some of these larger ones, they can get to pretty much any place that they need to get to within a day or two of their holdings. Which is pretty good for administration. So we've already dropped it down from like massive empires to being like a place you can probably ride end to end in a day, maybe 2, and a very large sort of county. So obviously in our counties, we're gonna have counts, counts or earls as the size. Often gonna be, but we'll also see that more likely it's gonna be one of these lower guys. There's either a Viscount who's in charge here. But remember, if you don't have a count already, you're going to need that Viscount to be reporting to a count. Or somebody else. So, they're basically... So, when we talked about those noble land holdings that then get spread around a whole bunch of places, you might have something like a Viscount or a Baronet, or somebody who's like a... kind of like your executive assistant, your right hand, your major domo, your seneschal. as a noble to be like, I need you to be in charge of those lands over there because I'm over here. That's when you end up with things like viscounts and baronets. So we have our marquises, we have our counts, we have our counts/earls, our viscounts, our barons. It gives you an idea of the nobles you'll come across during that time period, or during that sort of like level banding. And of course, this is county, which is our second level of adventurers, so that's adventurers 5 to 10. Would be dealing with these sorts of nobles, which I find super useful for D&D because D&D is not really good about giving you be like, hey, how do I work the level of adventure into the world? D&D it's very much like, I don't know, whatever. It's your world, you make it up. So I'm like, it's helpful to know, be like, oh, these might be the kind of levels of nobility I might be working with during this time period. It should be our marquises, our counts, or earls, our viscounts, or our barons. And then we go all the way down to our local hexes. Remember that each local hex, so each of these is tied to kind of roughly about as much land as they'd be administering. So princes and archdukes are like one atlas hex, which is still huge. You get down into region hexes, you have like these dukes that are about 4 to 9 region hexes are kind of the area they're working in. And we get down to the counties, and they have just a few county hexes they're in charge of, which means that they can get across. They should probably be able to get across most of their land from tip to tip in under a week, most likely, because most of their lands are going to be pretty wide circumference. Like, to ride the perimeter of it would take a long time, but to get from one end to another end is not that far, because they're going to be pretty blobby, circular in shape most of the time. And we have our viscounts and barons, and we go down to the local. So this includes a steading. So a steading is basically any amount of a settlement that's less than a hamlet, so up to 50 people essentially. So this would be like, oh well, again, Witcher 3 is such a great example because they do so much of that kind of historical stuff really right. Again, we look at the Robber Baron, we look at the Bloody Baron, and be like, oh, that dude's definitely a baron, and his castle includes like 50 people. There's not a ton of people there. There's only a few different people who are sort of like in and around that castle. And it helps tamp down, this was one of the things that I really liked when I was watching the Legend of El Cid show, is that they made the kings and the counts and those nobility, the court, if you want to call it that, of the king of Leon, feel very intimate. Like, there's not a ton of people in this room. Like, they're often in rooms with only like a handful of people making decisions about the kingdom. And so it does this great thing to remind that, to be like, oh, it's a steading. Like, there's not that many people that live around the castle. Like, it's just really the people who serve the castle. Everybody else is pretty much often being laborers in the field for the most part. Everybody else is pretty much farming. So the only people who live in and around the castle are going to be people like the scullery maids and men-at-arms that defend the castle proper. Whatever the smithy is, there's probably a stable of some type. Again, I like that show. I'm pretty sure the show is only done that way due to budget constraints, but I actually like that the castle and the people that work in it feel like such a small and intimate group of people. And I mean, it's not like you know every person on screen's name in that. There's tons of people. Most people you don't know, but it does give this feeling like, oh, it's still not big. It's not like a modern nation state where we have, you know, thousands and thousands of soldiers and all these things. It's like, no, there's just like a handful of guys, a castle that they hold, some horses that they have, and some people who serve them directly, who like make their food and clean their place up after them. and maintain it. Like, that's kind of it. So there's lots of it's a sizable building that often doesn't have that many people in it. So I like that. It helps remind me. It's probably one of the few depictions I've ever seen of castles that kind of make sense. Usually you go on one side where you're in something like Game of Thrones or Lord of the Rings, and you're like, there are way too many people in this castle. Like, there are like hundreds of people in this place. Or you float on the far other example of I'm thinking something stuff like early 80s movies, sword and sorcery movies, which are not great, but usually they're like castles that like a dude lives in and that's it, and maybe there's like 2 other people with him. And I'm like, there's not just like 3 people in charge of this whole place. Like, they would never hold this place. Like, somebody would take it from them. Even if you were a powerful sorcerers, warlockers, things like that, just a castle by itself is really difficult. That's why mages have towers. Towers have like one way in and one way out. They're pretty easy to defend. Whereas castles are too large of a space for a person to hold. Even a powerful warlock. So, this is one I want to expand a little bit on in the time we have left. Because I need to... So I've got the stuff that's handled for the nobles pretty well, but I need to accommodate these for the rest of the people up here. So that works for independent domains as well as nobles. But we need to fill in this part. We need the crown region and the church official. I've done the church official a little bit, but I haven't been very happy with it. Because I feel like there's not kind of enough stuff going on. There essentially aren't enough titles. So I wanted to see if there were some more titles I could kind of slot in there. So yeah, I changed this from Pope to Patriarch. I guess we continue to include. So Patriarchs are like the independent. We talked about these independent domains. Patriarchs, again, doing way too much, really melted my mind looking up stuff about the Latin Church. Patriarch churches are essentially the independent domains of the church world. When there's somebody who's like, yeah, I mean, technically you're Catholic, but you're kind of just doing your own thing. So you're just kind of in charge of whatever that is over there. This isn't worth getting into a fight over. And forcing you to worship like the rest of us. So those are kind of how Patriarch churches work. Which is a real thing in our world that you can go check out. Yay. So we have our cardinals. We have our cardinals, our patriarchs, our popes, our archbishops, our bishops, our priests, and our deacons. So I wanted to see if I could add a little bit extra in here. So I think what I want to do is I want to add in here. Yeah, because they're pretty much always subservient to a bishop, usually. Not always, but usually. Because I want to add abbot or abbess. I'm going to add that in there as a level. Because usually they are overseen by some sort of bishop or in some sort of diocese. But some of them have full autonomy and answer only to, like, the Pope. So, it's here and there. Which does feel about right for... That is kind of how barons work on the noble side. Which definitely puts us right in this baron kind of idea. But they should be more powerful than priest who's in charge of only a parish. So I think that makes sense to me. So I'm going to add them there. And then I'm going to add them at the top here. So yeah, we'll go ahead and make this 4. Because I also need to put priors. Because I also need to add what's their faces? Oh no, I may have to. Yeah. Can be like a cellarer or a steward. Yeah. Well, because I can also put, yeah, I guess that makes sense. And that's not how you spell abbot. Abbot or abbess. So we're going to add that in as well. So we're going to have their bishop or abbot or abbess. But we also need to put in priors. Or prioress. So, prior is in charge of a priory, which is kind of like the next level down from an abbey. So an abbey sometimes has multiple priories, one or more priories, which are like almost kind of like a viscount baronet kind of situation, where it's like, I can't be in charge of all of this, you also need to be in charge of your own thing that's going on over there. So then you would set up a prior. And then, and more. Maybe I should move these up a little bit then. Because I also want to add in, and it's kind of on the same level as deacon though. Which in this context and in the world that I have is basically like an acolyte. Who's in charge of something. Like deacons in the Catholic Church, it's like sometimes they're deacons for life, sometimes a deacon is a person who's on their way to becoming a priest. And so adding that in. And because we have this management as well, so we talked about earlier about adding conflict between our 3 different realms, right? We can have it, or technically 4 if we really include independent domains. Might have friction with nobles, who might have frictions with the crown, which might have frictions with the church. But all of those things also work within each other. So you can have a situation. Hello? Oh, sorry. My mic was showing me a weird thing. It looks like it's alright though. We're gonna plow through it. So yeah, essentially, I lost my train of thought. Oh, that they can have friction within that hierarchy, just like you may or may not have a friction at a job or with a teacher or etc. Within the institutions, there's also friction. So you can have 2 earls that don't like each other, 2 countesses who don't get along. Or in contest like one area of land or a resource that's really important to both their like neighboring holdings, and this thing's like kind of in the borderlands, so they're trying to figure out who actually owns it, and they might talk about it, they might fight about it, they might take it to the king, they might try to get the church to help out one of their sides. So immediately they start pulling these extra players from without and start pulling them in. Being like, how can you help me get the thing I need? You can immediately just start layering on this level of realism or complexity and just stuff that makes the world feel like, oh, not everything's black and white, super straightforward, simple and easy. It's like, no, these people are... It's also wildly mundane to have a D&D world, but like normal stuff, day-to-day stuff, happen. So there's definitely like people who bicker over a piece of land. It's like, yeah, sure, like Vecna or whatever, but also I need the headwaters of that river. That's my land. And this idiot over here saying it's their land. And we're going to come to blows about it. And that sort of stuff. So it's also wildly mundane. Which I like. When you are creating a campaign world and be like, I add in the mundane stuff, because by adding in the mundane stuff, the fantastical stuff seems way more fantastical, because now you have a point of reference against something else. So sometimes it feels like The Office, the show, but also like there's a dragon outside. And you'll be like, oh, like that's a real thing and a real problem. So we're gonna have to quit talking about whatever this is and deal with that. Which is a great place for adventurers to kind of step into and be like, yeah, we're really kind of interested more about the spring thing, so if you could go deal with the dragon, that'd be great. Sure, I'll pay you some money. Why not? I need to keep all my soldiers ready to fight over this spring with my neighbor. The headwaters of this river. So I want to add these guys down in here as well, but again, they're kind of on the level of Deacon, not quite. However, we'd also put like a brother or sister down here. You could potentially put a friar down here as well. Does make sense. Yeah. So these people are in charge of, like, this will almost always be like one local hex. You know that for sure. Some of these things I'm going to have to adjust a little bit, but I can't imagine these guys are ever going to be in charge of anything more than just like 2 nautical miles. They're basically in charge of like an estate. So we talked about there are abbeys, and then there are priories, which are sort of like field offices almost for an abbey, kind of. They're their own thing. They're generally a monastic community, so it's either going to be monks or nuns most of the time. But within that, they also have their own landholding. Again, because the church works, tip to tail, the full aspect of the administration of the land. So you need people who are just in charge of like a handful of fields over there, and that's where these guys kind of come in, where they operate a cell or a grain. Which I think is often what people think about when they think about like a cell, when they think about like monks or stuff like that, where there's just like a handful of them, where there's like a dozen of them. It's like, that's probably a cell of monks, and not truly like a priory or a monastery or an abbey, which would have way more people in it. So I might move these up. So I might include, I think it makes sense to go abbey, priory, elder brother, sister, friar should definitely be at the bottom. I don't think so. I think it should just be region, county, and local. I don't think you're going to have an abbey that's going to be on the same level as something like a patriarch or a archbishop, like an archdiocese. I don't think so. And most of them would report to, because in general, abbots usually report to a bishop or an archbishop, but not always, right? So I think it makes sense for them to be in that sort of region as their head, where they're kind of like a metropolitan. They're kind of in charge of an archbishop who's in charge of not only their own specific diocese, their own specific holdings, but also like all the dioceses usually around them. So all those smaller bishops, and within those bishoprics, inside those dioceses are multiple parishes. So that's how the administration kind of works down of priests. Basically, one priest to one parish, usually. Specifically during this time, but they might have multiple deacons with them, or acolytes, if you want to call them that. So I think that makes sense. So I think I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna move I'm gonna move them up here. Should they be in both? I think they should be in both. I think that makes more sense. They shouldn't be down here for sure. Maybe I'll put Prioress below Priest. I mean, I already did in the local hex, so I guess that makes sense. Thing is that a prior has to report to an abbot because they are a dependent function of an abbey. But I think that still makes sense. Again, I'll mess with this stuff as I always do. I'll go back in here and start tinkering with stuff off stream. But I want to get these things down first, and so that way I can show you guys and be like, this is kind of what it looks like, and this is what it kind of looks like when I'm building this kind of stuff. Ask myself a bunch of questions. What you don't see is like the stupid amount of hours I was looking at this stuff in the past week. It's like, okay, so how does the church work? Because I have no frame of reference. And how do I mess around with these noble titles? And what do I do for royal lands that need administration? And doing that sort of thing. You don't see that time. That's time. You just see this time where I'm trying to put pen to paper. Digital pen to digital paper. Figure it out. Yeah, that makes sense to me. Yeah, because they're... Yeah, I'm gonna leave them here. That's fine. I think that works. It's interesting to try to fold in the church stuff because the church stuff doesn't quite work like the noble stuff. So in the nobles thing, it's not like there's a duke and the duke has 7 counts below them that administer their lands. It doesn't really work like that. They have their own duchy and they do their own things. They have their basically, we had up here, we talked about having crown regents. They have basically their own regions or different members of their family who essentially hold those lands for them. But each of those domains is, each domain is like independent. They don't have like a traditional hierarchy because they all sum up to 100% of the crown holding. Their percentage of that. Whereas the church does work like a more standard hierarchy where it's like, oh, well, there's a province, which is usually what an archbishop or cardinal is in charge of. They have their province that they're in charge of, so which includes their archdiocese as well as a bunch of dioceses around it. So they usually have a bunch of bishops who kind of report to them about their own stuff. But they still have their own thing within the overall thing they're talking about. It's a little bit interesting. It works very much like a king does. The king is like, I have my royal lands, but also I oversee all these other nobles that have lands who manage them in my interest. That they hold on to that are their families. And they owe me the allegiance and usually some sort of allegiance as well as some sort of compensation. Usually it's, hey, we agree to bring you fighting men, essentially. So when you want to go to war with somebody or somebody attacks us, we pledge that you will bring all our guys from all our friends and you guys will show up for the fight. Essentially how that works. And then if you're not going to do that, you need to give me a money amount so I can hire mercenaries to do that instead. Which becomes more and more common later into the medieval, into Renaissance times where it's like, oh, armies are mainly bought and are a profession. Which are a different profession, so you have second sons who, if you're not going to, as a noble, you're not going to inherit land, and you decide not to go into the church, or you don't cut it in the church, you might become a mercenary. You might start your own mercenary band and try to gain fame and fortune that way, and try to carve out your own land holding by swinging a sword. So I think this works. I liked how that works. I need to add in. Yeah, got those. Sorry, I'm looking at my notes. I don't need to talk about nuncios right now. Yeah, like a parson who's in charge of a cell or a grange, and a grange is just an estate that's held by the church. And I'll go back and add all the like names for things, like a duke's in charge of a duchy, and an abbot's in charge of an abbey, and a cellarer's in charge of a cell. A priest is in charge of a parish. Right. Because I didn't have these guys in there. I need to add these guys in. Which kind of function? Like a deanery or vicariate. We're going to throw these guys. So I'm going to replace prior and prioress with that. That makes sense to me. We'll throw them down here. So vicar. So a deanery or a vicariate is basically multiple parishes, so they're in charge of multiple priests. Though maybe that makes more sense to remove priests then. Did I add it to region? No, because then they could end up like on top of bishops, which is not great. Because they definitely report to bishops. That would not work. Never mind. Bad idea. We put priest. Yeah, but I'm also gonna put missionary. Well, no, I'm not gonna put missionary because missionaries would be more tied to a location, which would be not number 2, which is what we're working on, which is holdings or fortifications. That would fall under 3, which is religious sites. I'll need to add that in there because I don't think I have a mission on here. I do not. Though missions are very specific, so they'll need to go. They won't be their own thing. They'll need to. I'll probably throw it in here, like Pilgrim's Rest or Hospital, medieval sense. Yeah. Not like a hospital you go to for wounds, but a place where you stay, kind of like an inn, almost. So a Pilgrim's Rest, a hospital, or mission. I think that makes most sense here. Yeah, and I've already got Chantry and Hermitage in there. An almshouse, a hospital. So hospital is technically on here twice. But hospital is, they're different hospitals, if that makes sense. This is the hospital in the medieval sense, which is the place where you can go and stay very cheaply. It's basically like a super cheap inn. It's just that over time, a lot of sick people did end up there, and then that became a hospital, which is what we have up here. It's like, oh no, this is like a place where they treat sick and ill people, which is firmly a function of the church in this sort of world, and which is pretty consistent with the time period we're trying to emulate. Like, oh yeah, it's like a, you go to, and even today, like a lot of hospitals are named after saints still. Like, oh yeah, well, we're going to, St. Christian's or whatever. They're like, oh yeah, that's the hospital. So that is one of those things that's a very old thing that has just permeated still to this day in modern life. Alright, let's go back to our holdings. So yeah, I'm not going to add missionary is essentially what I was going to do. I was going to add missionary, and now I'm like, I'm not going to add missionary. That's fine. Alright, what am I missing? I've got those fish, and I'm not putting the mission there. Mission is fully a religious site. And I don't... Now, of course, I could be super wrong, but in my mind, I don't think missionaries typically had their own land holdings. Because why would they go to the other side of the world to be missionaries if they could just do that? If they had their own stuff to look over. And they do look over the mission, which will have its own lands, but is firmly a religious site. Oh yeah, I need to add my fighting orders. So that was one of the things I didn't have, and I haven't been putting in, because I don't think it's on religious side either. Oyster. Grave. Repository. I sure don't. That's fine. Because it makes more sense as a fortification. And if we're going to add our fighting orders in, those are our Templars, our Mendicants. There's a few fighting orders. This would be basically when we talked earlier about being really upset that there's a fighting order with like 50 knight level guys that just chill out in our country, in our little barony. It's not cool. So we need to add those people in. So we need to add, I'm going to go ahead and put this, because we got the guy way up here at the top. So we can add in as a religious official that we can add in here. So we've got our cardinals, our patriarchs, our popes, our archbishops, and we're also going to have our grandmasters. The grandmaster is the person who's basically in charge of the entire like Templar order or something like that. That's the grandmaster. It's their headquarters. Generally a castle, almost always a castle. Certainly during this time period. To be a defensible structure of the faith. We're definitely adding him in. Under this guy, and I'll probably reorder it. I'm just going to put him at the bottom for right now. A provincial or... you know what? I may just leave it as provincial. No, because that guy needs to be a prior. Okay. Or provincial or chapter master. So this is a person who's in charge of a province or a chapter of the fighting order, who generally oversees other people. Again, the church is has a nice hierarchy structure. It's super confusing, and they have honorary titles and stuff that makes it a little difficult to figure out. But it is a little confusing, but it is pretty. There is a method to the madness. Put it that way. Our provincial or chapter master. And then on the counties, we're going to have a prior. But I need to put in a little note here. We're going to be like, this is not, because this is, like I said, it's very confusing. So there are priors who serve for priory, which serve as an abbey, who is usually respond under a bishop or archbishop, or sometimes just under the Pope or whoever's actually in charge of the religion, the high priest. But then on the fighting order side, there are also priories, but they're not the same priories, and they're not really the same level either. So a little confusing when you're trying to mesh all this stuff together. So we have that. So we're going to do our prayer or prayers. It's going to be fighting order. And I'll go ahead and put this down here. This is an abbey priory. And I mean, if I'm gonna put it out there, yeah, it's fine. I'm just gonna put it in here. Like if I'm doing that, I'm doing too much work. Fighting order priorist. We'll put abbey dependent. There we go. And then down on the local level, this is where things are going to get weird because it's really hard to do these. As you might have seen, there's like dice notations to allow me to roll on these because there should be more of the lower titles and less at the upper titles, so it's weighted. That gets hard to do once I get into like 5. It's easy to do for 2, 3, and 4. We can do an 80-20 or a 1, a 2, and a 3 on a D6 results. And on 4, I can do a 10 where it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, bowling pin style, doing that pyramid shape that I'm a big fan of. If you're not familiar with what I'm talking about, there's a whole video about 2d6 tables where I talk about that. And for secret, I think I also talk about it in there, like my secret tips for like dungeon masters, tricks and dungeon masters is dice weighting like that. We'll go into it a little bit more in depth. But it's hard to do for 5 because there's not a clean, easy, simple way to do it with a die for 5. So I might combine some on the same level. We'll see. And then we have down here, we're going to put this down here. Again, we're just putting them at the bottom. Fighting order commander. I should just write fighting order on all of these so I know what they are when I look back at them later. I haven't really internalized that yet. Perfect. The commander is in charge of a commandery, which is a fun word you don't get to use very often. And that is like the cell or the grange. It's a very small, like, an estate that the fighting order's in charge of, that this person's in charge of. Yeah, very much like a cell. So it's like there's probably like a dozen dudes here. There's like a dozen people here who administer some land. So there's a little holding here as well. They have up to 50 people who live in a little village right next to them, who are the farmers who work the land and stuff like that. And they keep themselves in fighting order and manage the land from that aspect. They're the muscle. So like that. Those all work really well for me. So the only thing I need to add in here is I need to add one other one. What I'll probably do is I'll probably end up combining these lists into just a table instead. And just have a column for noble, crown regent, church official. An independent domain will be the same as noble. Because you can absolutely have like a state or nation that doesn't have a king in charge of it. It's actually pretty common. Like Monaco, right? Monaco's technically a princedom, I think. Or principality. I think technically Monaco is a principality, right? Prince of Monaco. Right, the Archduke of Austria, Hungary. Very, very easy. Alright, so, but we do need to make one for our regions. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy this guy. We're going to do it down here at the bottom. Yeah, it's more in here. Disregard these numbers down here. They're not for anything. They were for something I was working on probably when I was trying to figure out how much hexes to give each other. I just didn't clean up my work. I can actually just... Did I leave it? No, it's fine. I'll delete. It's fine. Alright, so we need to figure out... You need to basically duplicate this list around the region. So I've got some written down. Where are they? But some that I also want to change. Alright, so yeah, sorry, I'm reading my notes. You're seeing the slow process in process. What's our religious official? Wait, Crown Regent, there we go. Alright. So primary, our number one guy up here. We're just gonna delete these. I'm gonna have to remake all that stuff anyways. So up here we're gonna put regent. It's literally somebody who's filling in for a king. So again, like the king might be too young or the king has died. Very Gondor, right? Gondor is ruled by regents. Before Aragorn comes back. Spoiler, I guess, for an old movie and an older book. Regent. Who else should we put up here? We should probably put Seneschal. Or Major Domo. Major Domo. Oh, yeah, it's all one word, right? Major Domo or Seneschal. What's that? Let me look back at the list. All right, all the way down to Archduke or Prince. Archdukes or Princes on this. Seneschal's on there. No, okay. That's fine. We'll just have the two up here. Which means that anybody who falls into this would be most likely a major domo or seneschal. It's unlikely that there's going to be a regent if it's a kingdom and I already know who the king is. But if it's not, if it's somebody who's in charge of it, that would be very interesting. It also allows me to put like 2 large fortifications within one nation state. So I can be like, oh, well, king's in charge of this castle, but their regents over there, or their seneschals over there. And he holds sort of like the western lands or whatever it is. Alright, so I'm good with that. It'll definitely be like an 80-20 there, which will work really well. I was thinking about adding Castellan, but I think I'm just gonna... Yeah, so we'll start with Seneschal. So you'll see, like I said before, you'll see some of these crossover boundaries where some Seneschal holdings are really large and some are not quite as big. So that way, this helps me, I like, because in history, there's no, like, standardization as far as, like, how much land or how many people a certain title is in charge of. You have counties that are bigger than some dukedoms or duchies. It's just weird like that. It's not a very clean system, so I don't want it to be super clean. So I want sometimes, you know, sometimes there's a seneschal who has less holdings. So sometimes I'll do that where I'll like cross them over. We've got Seneschal. We're gonna do Castellan. Even though basically almost all of these people would technically be a Castellan, because a Castellan is just a person in charge of a castle. But we're going to use it as a higher holding. And we're going to do steward. A steward. Okay, there we go. So we have Seneschal, Castellan, and Steward. And those will go way down. Okay. Which also means that most of those... Sorry, I know I'm not showing you my notes, but it's just chicken scratch that wouldn't make sense for you guys to look at it. It's just... I can barely make sense of it. Which makes it sound like I don't take very good notes. I think my notes are fine. I think they're okay. Not terrible. Alright, so we have... so definitely not that guy. But it starts with Castellan. All the way down. I'm just going to do those 4. I'm not going to include the last one, I don't think. Yeah, that's fine. So again, like we said, Castellan's technically a guy that's in charge of a castle. We can do Castellan, Steward, a bailiff. It's one of the things where it's like sometimes the notes I get are not correct. Like these notes that I pulled up, and this happens often, I find, is that pretty much every other source says either bailiffs are more important than reeves, and every other source says reeves are more important than bailiffs. I like to say that reeves are usually on top just because we have Shire Reeves, which becomes sheriff, which is basically a county reeve. And so it makes sense for that to be a thing, and then reeve, and then bailiff. Because bailiff usually serves a more specific function. Usually they're much more what we would consider, strangely enough, they're a little bit closer to what we would consider like maybe like a Wild West sheriff is kind of a bailiff. And not how we think of bailiff in the legal context today, where they're like the officer who oversees the courtroom. So yeah, I think I'm gonna go with the reeve first. Yeah, that's a lot of me talking around to be like, I'm gonna put reeve there instead. Oh my gosh. Put reeve there. And that will give me... Do I want to put bailiff up there? No, because I think a Shire Reeve or a county reeve should become a reeve. No, just put that in here, because it should be like a Shire Reeve. Then I think it makes sense to start with reeve again. Reeve, but like a small reeve. And reeves or bailiffs are things that nobles typically have that help them manage their land, is that they also have these, would hire these offices. So they work for regents of the crown, but also they could be regents to another noble in the land too, if you wanted to add that. Like we said, that there might be a king who has a seneschal who holds like part of their empire or lands or whatever they're in charge of. There's no reason a noble can't also be like, well, I've got multiple castles, so I've got a few castellan who serve me. But usually, in this context, I'm probably gonna make it one of these guys. Because I haven't gotten into too much, mainly because I need to do the world mapping on that scale for such a... I need to sit down and take like a kingdom or a nation state and be like, this is everything that's in it. But as we saw when I did the math for the hexes, it's just a lot of hexes. So I'm a little shy at doing that. Not necessarily champing at the bit to do it. All right, so we got our reeve, our bailiff, warden or keeper is kind of the bottom there, and the thing that I have in my note is a vavasor, which, you know, because I was not familiar with this word. I have literally never seen it before. A sub-vassal below a baron. Sometimes referring to lesser free peasants in early records. I think that's fine. There we go. Vavasseur is French. That's French. French. Yeah, vassal or tenant of a baron who held his tenancy under a baron and also had tenants under him. So that would put it basically on par with baronet, which makes sense, as baronet is very much what our next to last under nobles. Oh, well, there's knights and lords too. That's fine. But it makes sense that it's way down here, and I think we have one more, but I just don't like the word, unfortunately. Can we get a... Let's look at some synonyms. See if there's anything better that we like as a synonym. A feudatory. Oh, I like liegeman. That's cool. I like that. Yeah, not a villain. A villain's a very specific person. I could also just use tenant. Tenants is good. What is isn't there like vassalary? Am I making that up? Vassalary. And tenant works, but tenant's just it's so weird with the context of like the modern context of tenants in like an apartment or a lease of some kind. And I'm not sure that translates super well to D&D logistically, like just trying to play the game. Like, and the tenant, it was like, wait, do you mean tenant like a person who rents here, or a tenant like that guy who's in charge of stuff? So feudatory, I like feudatory, but it again is just a weird word. I guess I'm gonna go with liegeman. Vassal's okay, but vassal's so broad the context for anybody who owes allegiance to somebody. But I like liegeman. Liegeman has a very sort of just like a tradesman or craftsman kind of feel to it that I like. So yeah, which I think works because that makes me think of like a knight. Yeah, that doesn't fall pretty close in line with what I think of like maybe a knight. It's like the knight level of like a allegiance, then a warden or a keeper who might be even smaller. So I could just leave it at war. Ugh. Sorry, right into the mic. That was dumb. Sorry about that. I could just straight up use Warden. But yeah, we'll leave this how it is for now, and I think maybe I'll mess with it later and see how I feel about it. Because Liegeman is a little bit weird. I like Reeve, Bailiff, and Warden. Probably not Keeper. I'm not really. You know what? I'll leave it. I don't know. It could be somebody's cool name though. Like, Keeper Lesage is in charge of this area. I could do something like that. Which, I mean, Warden Lesage sounds cool, but Keeper Lesage, I don't know. It's got that fantasy spice on it. I like. Keeper of what? Keeper of what? Kind of immediately has you question something as a player. Be like, but what do you keep? There is a. In the current campaign I'm playing in, there's an NPC that is the shell keeper, and I'm like, so I don't know. Every time I think about it, I was like, but why is there just one person in charge of the shell? That seems weird. It always makes me like think I want to understand more about this weird position that that works in the shogunate. But I like keeper. But I may drop it. You know, these things are always a work in progress. They are never truly done. They're never truly finished. But that gives us everybody, I think. I think that's everybody. So I just need to add the dice to it. So we can look at that when we're like, okay, let's say we were. Let me actually. I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna throw us over to. This will be the last little bit we're doing here. So this is the sort of island map, not full, not completed by any means. This was a work in progress. This is an old map actually. So this guy in here, I don't want to move it. Oh. Get out here. Okay. So, this is the island that we're currently playing on. It may not look like an island, but it is an island. It's just got so many like low tidal. It's a very shallow part of the Gold Sea that they're in. There's a whole bunch of like mangrove marsh kind of stuff that's around the island, but there is the island proper, kind of in the middle. Off the peninsula. And so I want to look at, so we've got three, no, we've got four. You can see them, zoom in a little bit. These shields, that's what is the stamp I used to denote like this is a holding. So we've got four of them. So we've got 1, 2, 3, and 4. Who are essentially managing the island. Now, currently, I should tell you that there are more than this. There are other people in some of these trial hexes. There are other nobility, essentially. I can tell you who these guys are right now. So, this is Bayfera. And a bay in this context is the language we're using for their titles, but she's a lady. She's a lady. She is a lady as in the title, like lord or lady. So she is a very small minor holding. Or, no, sorry. That's not Bayfera. Not Bay at all. Sorry, she's like a baronet. She's actually one of the more powerful people in here. So, she's Bayfera. This is Baysada, who's over here. So they're the two big, and they're like basically barons, kind of, who lord over this island. Along with some other minor nobles. These two guys down here, this one right here, and this one right here, are both Knights. They're knights. In this context, they are called Ghazi, and they are like holy knights, really. Because they're in a caliphate, I should put that. So they are ruled by their religion, is the primary organization. So I did this with the noble tiles because I just ended up rolling a bunch of nobles. See up here when we roll the d10 that there's a 40% chance that I'm going to roll noble. Sorry, you're not looking at the same thing. That's all we really need to see of that map, though. Well, that's not true. So there's a 40%. I'll just remind you guys rather than switch back. There's a 40% chance that they're going to be nobles. There's a 30% chance that they're going to be those regents. A 20% chance that they'll be a church official, and a 10% chance that they're just going to be an independent noble of some type. So all of these I happen to roll nobles on. It seems a little unlikely, but it's more likely than any other result. In addition to this, there is a church official who has lands here as well. But no regents and no independent domains. Well, not totally true. There is an independent domain, just not a legal one. Not legally recognized one. There is a sort of like Robin Hood, robber baron kind of person who also has their own domain here, but it's just not officially recognized. But if you try to come and take it from them, they'll kill you, for sure, probably. Who's hanging out on the island that my players have not run across yet, but will at some point. I am certain about that. Well, they will probably run across them at some point. There's a chance they don't. But the reason I wanted to bring up this map is I wanted to be like, okay, so let's re-roll them. I'm going to roll 10 new dice. To see what it could look like. So right now everybody's pretty much in alignment. They're all nobles. They're all not quite equals, but on equal holding with each other. They're on equal standing with each other as far as society is concerned. Obviously the barons, or the baronets are more powerful because they have larger land holdings, but they treat the Ghazi, the knights, as their essentially equals. So I re-rolled them, and we'll just go around. So we've got a 4 here, so we'll just leave that as the noble it was. So that's going to continue to be our bay. Oh, I realized that doesn't show. That doesn't show on the feed. That's funny. I'm doing the thing where you can tap control and it does a little zoom thing with the to kind of show you where the pointer is. But that's not showing up on the feed, which is funny. Very funny. Alright, so that's going to remain what it is. I rolled a 7 for one over here on our top right. And 7, again, is a crown regent. Alright, so we would have our baronet, and then we'd have our crown regent. I rolled another 2, so this would remain a Ghazi. And then I rolled a 10, so this would actually be its own independent domain down here in the bottom right. So, interesting. So, just doing that, and again, each one of these is those league hexes, so they are league or local hexes, so they're only about 2 and some change miles across. So, it's not a huge island, it's a pretty small island, but it tells you who manages the island. A small island that's got it's got a pretty sizable port town on it. So we have it tells you who's in charge of those. Now, none of them are actually in charge of the city because the city has its own charter from the caliphate, from the Caliph. So they have their own charter that they hold. It is not actually, this is the town. But this is, this knight that's right next to him, he's not in charge of that town. That town has its own charter. So it's in charge of itself. And it pays taxes directly to the caliphate. So, but we can already see, even just doing that, even just adding a city that people aren't in charge of, that is the bulk of the commerce, the island, should already tell you how the nobles feel about that place. They probably don't like it a whole bunch. They also don't like that they basically have to treat the burgher or mayor, and here they're called the light keeper. They have to see, I told you I like keeper as a word. And they have to treat basically the mayor of the town as one of their equals, even though that person is for sure not a noble. And is in fact an ex-pirate. So you can already tell that they probably don't get along very well. Which is very fun if you have... I try to run quests or adventures where you need to go to different places and talk to different people to figure out stuff or to get things from one another. So immediately adding in a wrinkle, like if you get sent by the Lightkeeper on a mission to do something and you try to talk to one of these nobles about it, they're unlikely to be helpful. Because, first of all, they don't have to be. They don't owe the town anything. And second of all, they're not going to spend their resources for the crown. We already do that for the crown. We already pay allegiance to the crown. We're not giving them extra stuff. This is my stuff you're asking for. So you can already feel like there's this social friction that's going to happen between them. And this one over here, we know is going to be our regent. Let's see what kind of regent they are, just for funsies. Let's see. So this would be a local hex that they're in charge of, so all the way down there. So it's either our reeve, our bailiff, our liegeman, or our warden or keeper. I'm gonna roll 10. Roll an extra d10. Roll to 5. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's our third one down. Hey, they are a liegeman, in fact. Yeah, you would end up with a bunch of liegemen. I think I maybe will remove liegeman. I'm not going to do it right now, but I think I will probably remove liegeman and just keep it as reeve, bailiff, or warden or keeper. Being like a crown warden or crown reeve, crown bailiff. That's a cool way to add to it. In fact, I'm just going to... Maybe I should just add crown to the front of most of these things. Castellan's pretty straightforward. But being a crown warden sounds much more impressive than just warden. I like that. And it tells you that, hey, I report to the crown. I like it. But this person's going to be a crown liegeman, at least in this context. They're a crown liegeman who's in charge of... Yeah, right here. So we have our baronet that's hanging out up here. Got a baronet down here, or sorry, a knight down here. We have our crown liegeman in charge of this. So there's already going to be a friction. So now you've got friction between the town, and you've got friction between the nobles, and you've got friction between this crown regent, who is probably also, as part of their job, supposed to be spying on all these people and making sure that they're doing the things they're supposed to be doing. That's probably a big part of their job, as well as just being the royal presence. So, you know, they have to treat that person also as an equal. The nobles have to treat that person also as an equal, but also, like, can't really confide in them with anything because they know that they can just write a letter to, like, the king. So it becomes a bit of an issue. There's already going to be some distance and friction there as well. Especially if they have reported on them about something they were doing in the past. And it became a thing. Alright. And then down here we have our independent domain. Right? What is our independent domain? We have a person here who's on the island, who's maybe had generations on the island, who just owns this part of the island that's not considered technically part of the caliphate. That they're basically given autonomy. Which is funny because if that were the case on this island, that is where they would probably be in charge of both this area and this area, which are both the landings for the ferry for the island. So that's a very interesting thing to leave in an independent domain's hands. But what would they be? Let's see. Our hex sizes for local is a D10, so let's roll one more D10. And I rolled an 8. And an 8 for that is they're their own baronet. So they own quite a bit of land. So they are as powerful. They are more powerful than most of the people on the island. There is that one other baronet that's up here, who is their own noble. But this is also a noble. So now you have this weird thing where you have, okay, so the city is a faction, and the nobles are going to be a faction. We'll just throw them in together, have the knight and the baronet together as a faction, even though they probably have some internal friction as well. And neither one is subservient to the other. That's the important thing. You have the crown liegeman, who's sort of the crown's influence on the island, trying to keep things interesting, which is interesting because this is a hotbed of smuggling onto the mainland. Is based out of this port town at the southwest. So they have a castle agent there, but they're on the opposite side of the island from it. Very interesting. So it feels very much like, oh, just like, don't get crazy. I'm leaving a guy here. Keep an eye on you. If you get too crazy, he's going to tell me about it. But I understand that this is a smuggler port, and as the Caliph, I am happy to just let that kind of happen on the books. Like, I understand that if anything's super egregious, of course we're going to catch it, but generally it's just like, we understand it's going to happen. We understand there's a black market here. It's fine. You can't solve all the problems in one go. We got bigger fish to fry. So, got that on the island. So we've got the city that's on the island that's run by an ex-pirate locally. Currently, because the town is a democracy. The town actually hires or votes to put somebody in the lightkeeper duty, who is basically the mayor of the town. So nobody likes dealing with these people because these people change every so often. Because it's not just one person you're dealing with, where everybody else you probably deal with the same person all the time. The two baronets are going to stay consistent for the most part. The knight's going to stay consistent for the most part. And the crown regent probably stays pretty consistent. The crown's liegeman probably stays pretty consistent. That's probably not a thing that changes very often. Maybe they hold that title until they die. Maybe it does change often. I can always make that decide to be like, no, actually, we don't spend a lot of time dealing with the crown liegeman because that person is a new face like every other year. So it's not really worth getting to know them. And you can't really influence them very much in that sort of a time span. They usually send people over here who are very much like polished boots. I'm a soldier for the Caliph. And they're like, and they're actually a pain in the butt because they're a by the books kind of people. So they're kind of a pain in the ass to deal with. And so you layer all this social stuff kind of on top of it by using those three, but sometimes there's 4. Like in this example, we had the 4th. Where we had their independent domain baronet down here, who's actually pretty powerful. So probably like owns probably most of this land over here. Like probably lords over most of this land. Probably all the way down stuff where there's some hills that are popping out of the marsh. They probably own this entire southeastern hex. They're probably in charge of that because nobody's in charge of this hex. So that makes sense that this is like their independent domain, is like this corner of the island and all this stuff that's down here around it. But yeah, you start laying in that stuff, and then there's once you start adding people who are not on the same side, you have this sort of factional struggle, which you can scale up if you want to. If you want to make that part of your world, you can scale that up and be like, no, these they're like this this baron not getting along with this independent domain is a microcosm of a much larger conflict that's happening maybe between independent domains within in this particular instance the caliphate, where there's maybe maybe there's a little bit of a rebellion going on, or revolt or something like that. Maybe something like that's happening, and people are starting to throw in with the independent domains because they don't want to live under the caliphate's yoke anymore. You can do all that stuff, and once you start layering that stuff on, and you can scale it up by levels, this stuff, basically the game just kind of does itself. I'm just along for the ride. Rather than trying to do prepping in a very traditional, well, not traditional, but I would say more contemporary D&D style, where you plan out so many encounters and all that stuff and do all those things, and before you begin a campaign, you figure out what that campaign's going to be about from the very start to the very last session. Instead, I do this and be like, the story just kind of writes itself, and depending on what you guys do in here, things happen and things begin to escalate because of your involvement. And the adventure just kind of writes itself. I don't really have to do a whole lot of plotting. The plot just kind of happens because you are people in this world that kind of functions like a real world. So if you do something for the city or the town and that snubs one of the nobles, they're going to remember that. Like currently my party has absolutely welched on a quest. Their very first quest on the island, and the Ghazi, the knight that they kind of snubbed in that, has not let them forget that, and has made life more difficult for them. Specifically right now, they are making it more difficult for them right now. And then immediately started talking to the bishop about these people, who was previously on their side, was on the adventurer's side, but they just like kind of let her walk off with the Ghazi, and the Ghazi's like, Ghazi's gonna take this opportunity up for one-on-one time and try to probably turn them on you. And this bishop's not going to be your friend after this, maybe, if they do a very good job. But yeah, that's it. I mean, that's, like I said, this stuff kind of writes itself. It's very fun. I love putting this stuff together. I've been working on this expansion for my hex stocking stuff, and it's been really great. Be able to add in this extra layer, so it's not always some baron they're running across or some knight. Like, yeah, sometimes it's the steward for the crown steward, or sometimes it's the priest's personal holdings that they have, and sometimes you run across the baron, but this baron is actually, like Strahd, not ruled over by anybody except that person. That person's independent and in charge of their own lands, and you might have different laws. You might try to be like, well, we have this order from the king to go through there. Like, I don't care. He's not my king. I don't care what piece of paper you have. So just doing that just makes the game so much more fun. At least it does to me. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed this and got something out of it, and you were able to be like, oh, I should really think about, you know, the sort of people and power players and how they interact, and how I can use that as part of it. It's a very minimal amount of work just figuring out who's in charge of stuff that has such a maximal output for your game, where you can be like, oh, there's just like stuff that happens. Like, people just don't get along. They're in conflict or disagreement about something. It's very easy to layer that onto your world, and just with that minimal amount of work, the world becomes so much richer and deeper and feels way more lived in, like this is a real place with real consequences and real people doing stuff. Which is I love out of my adventures, and I love running D&D in that way, where it's like, you know, you're a real person in a real world. We don't, doesn't mean that you have to tell me when your character uses the bathroom. It just means that the world feels real. It feels what they would call grounded. It feels realistic. It feels like this is a place. Which, when you can do that for your setting, for your backdrop for a D&D game, it feels much... your game will feel so much richer in texture. That tapestry of your game is so much more well embroidered. In addition to the whatever, campaign plot maybe you've created for your campaign already. So that's everything I really wanted to talk about. We've gone for quite a bit. But hey, thanks for hanging out with me, guys. And we'll do this again real soon. All right. So you guys have fun. I'll see you guys later. All right. Bye.